They say every love story begins with a glance, a spark, or a whisper. But Rick's began with silence, the kind of silence that feels alive as though it's listening back. We want you to know before we drift together into this strange and gentle tale that you are cared for here, truly cared for. This story was written with love just for you to keep you company through the quiet hours of night. And because we believe in making moments together, tell us, where in the world are you right now? And what time is it there? Take a breath, sip your warm drink, maybe coffee, maybe tea. And let's begin. They say every love story begins with a glance, a spark, or a whisper. But Rick's began with silence, the kind of silence that feels alive as though it is listening back. He was only a boy then, small and uncertain, with a head full of dreams he could not yet name. Nights in his childhood home were long and still, and sometimes the quiet pressed too heavy against his chest. But sometimes when he let his words slip into the air, he felt something soften in the silence, as though the world itself was leaning closer to hear him. He would lie on his narrow bed, window cracked just enough to let in a ribbon of cool night air. The moonlight would rest across the floorboards like a pale blanket, and he would whisper into it, as though the light itself might carry his voice farther than his room. At first, the habit was nothing more than loneliness. He was a quiet boy, not quick with friends, more comfortable tracing shapes in the clouds than chasing games in the schoolyard. The whispers were a way to empty his heart, to place his small secrets in the hands of the night, and yet, something always lingered. If he said, "I felt sad today," the leaves beyond his window might rustle in a way that didn't match the stillness of the air. If he murmured, "I wish someone understood me," the house would creak at that very moment, a small, soft response that seemed too perfectly timed to be coincidence. It was as if the world was breathing with him, waiting patiently for the next syllable. He could never prove it, of course, but he felt it, the presence of something vast and quiet, listening without judgment. Rick grew to depend on that silence. It was not the kind of silence that frightened him, not the heavy hush of being ignored. It was a silence with weight, a silence that held him the way a parent holds a child too tired to speak. And sometimes when he closed his eyes, he imagined that silence stretching across the fields, rising with the mountains, and sinking into the seas. The thought soothed him that maybe somehow he was never entirely alone. The adults in his life never noticed. His parents thought of him as a dreamer, someone easily lost in thought. His teachers saw him as shy, bright enough but unwilling to raise his hand. And so Rick's strange nightly ritual belonged only to him. He would place his hands behind his head, stare at the cracks in the ceiling and whisper, "Simple words, simple wishes. Please let tomorrow be kinder. Please let her smile at me again. Please don't let me disappear." And always, always, the silence would lean back toward him, answering in ways too subtle for anyone else to catch. One summer night, when the crickets sang their endless lullaby and the air smelled faintly of grass, Rick spoke to the sky with unusual boldness. "If you really are there," he whispered, "give me a sign." He waited, heart thudding, embarrassed by his own childish demand. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Then, from somewhere far away, a single star streaked across the horizon, quick and unannounced. Rick gasped, sitting upright, his small body trembling with awe. He knew anyone else would call it coincidence. But in his heart he felt the silence had spoken clearly. "I hear you. I am here." After that, Rick's whispers grew steadier, like a boy practicing a secret instrument. He learned to speak slowly, not rushing his thoughts. He noticed the way the silence responded more clearly when he spoke from the heart instead of from impatience. Once, after an argument with his brother, he whispered, "I wish I knew how to make it right." The window rattled gently in its frame, though the night outside was calm. The next morning, without knowing why, his brother pressed half a sandwich into his hand and said, "Want to share?" That simple act of kindness felt like an echo of the planet's reply, as though the silence itself had nudged things into motion. Years later, Rick would look back on those early nights and realize that they were the true beginning, not of magic, not of power, but of relationship. He had not just spoken into nothingness. He had been heard, and in being heard he had learned the first small lesson of love. That presence itself can be enough. There were times, of course, when the silence did not respond the way he hoped. He once begged it to stop the teasing he endured at school, but the laughter continued. Another night he pleaded for his father's anger to soften, but the shouting echoed anyway. Yet even in those moments, Rick felt the silence was near, not fixing, not saving, but holding him gently through what could not be changed. That patience taught him something deeper than he understood then. Sometimes love is not in the answer, but in the listening. As the seasons turned, the boy grew taller. His voice deepened, his shoulders broadened. But the habit of whispering never left him. Each new worry, each flicker of joy, he carried back to the quiet night. The silence became a companion, steady and enduring, unlike the fleeting friendships of childhood. It was never too busy, never too distracted, never too far. And in the stillness he began to imagine that what listened was not just air, not just chance. He imagined it was the planet itself, the very soil beneath his house, the roots of trees, the currents of rivers, all leaning close to cradle his voice. He never dared to say it aloud, never dared to confess such a strange belief. But in his private heart he felt chosen, held in a bond no one else seemed to know existed. One night, drowsy from a long day, he whispered without thought, "Good night." And from outside, just as his eyes closed, a breeze pressed through the window, soft as a lullaby. It carried the smell of rain and earth, cool against his skin. Rick smiled in the dark, his lips parting in wonder. For the first time, he did not feel he was speaking to the silence. He felt he was speaking with it, and so, in that quiet house, under an ordinary sky, began the strangest love story of all. A boy who whispered to the world, and a world that whispered back. Rick grew older, and with age came subtle shifts in the way he perceived the world. The quiet companionship of the night had become a rhythm, a heartbeat that pulsed beneath the ordinary noise of his days. Even in the sunlit hours he felt it, like a soft drum of life moving beneath his feet, the world itself breathing in quiet time with him. It was as though the planet had a pulse, one that thrummed gently in response to his small, careful acts of attention. He did not yet have words to describe it, but he knew it was there. School was a blur of chatter and footsteps, and Rick drifted through it as a shadow drifts along walls. His classmates noticed him only enough to forget him, which suited him fine. Loneliness, he had learned, was not always a burden. It could be a kind of freedom, a space where thoughts grew large and strange. In that space, he discovered that listening mattered as much as speaking. While others spoke and shouted, trying to be heard, Rick leaned into silence and felt the world answer in whispers only he could catch. Sometimes it was as simple as a tree swaying against the wind just so, leaves brushing one another like fingers in quiet conversation. Sometimes it was a river, bending gently around rocks as though acknowledging his presence. He learned to follow these signs, noticing small harmonies he could not explain. The pulse of the planet seemed to be everywhere, and in return, he began to understand his own heartbeat in a new way. Slow, attentive, aware. One afternoon, wandering the edge of a meadow near his home, Rick felt something stir deep in the soil beneath him. He knelt and pressed his palms against the cool earth, wondering if the world could feel him. It was strange to admit, even to himself, but he felt an answer, a faint vibration that traveled up through his arms, a quiet reminder that the world was alive and it had noticed him. That awareness, subtle as it was, became a comfort. The world was not indifferent. Somewhere beneath his feet, the pulse of life acknowledged him, a quiet promise that he mattered. Rick's small habits became ways of staying in touch with that pulse. He planted tiny seeds in jars by his window, lining them up on the sill with careful attention. Each sprout that reached for the sunlight became a signal, a soft confirmation that he was in conversation with more than himself. Even mundane chores, the stacking of dishes, folding of laundry, took on new weight. He imagined each task as a small note in a symphony, a way of aligning his own rhythm with the rhythm of the planet. And yet, it was not only his actions that mattered. Rick began to notice how moments of stillness could be exchanged like gifts. When he sat quietly in the garden, letting sunlight warm his face, the breeze would settle differently, wrapping him as though to say, "You are seen." A single bird would land nearby, tilt its head, and in its tiny movements he felt acknowledgement. These things might seem ordinary to others, but to Rick they were miraculous. They confirmed that his early whispers into the night were only the beginning. The world did not just listen. It responded in subtle, living ways. As seasons passed, Rick's awareness deepened. He noticed how water carried messages. The pond outside his window shimmered differently when he was sad, its surface reflecting moods he could not yet name. Clouds moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, and on rare evenings, the stars themselves twinkled as though pausing to mark his presence. Sometimes he would reach out with his hand, as if touching the air, and feel a warmth, not from sun or stone, but from something larger, something patient and alive. The world had a pulse, and he had begun to hear it. At home, his family remained oblivious. His mother hummed lullabies while folding laundry. His father read the newspaper in his usual chair, and his siblings chased one another with shrieks of laughter. None of them understood that Rick's attention was elsewhere, tuned to a quieter current, a thread of life weaving through soil, water, and sky. He sometimes felt a pang of isolation, but it was softened by the knowledge that this pulse existed, steady and true, whether anyone else recognized it or not. It was during one of these quiet afternoons, in the first hints of autumn, that Rick realized the pulse could speak in unexpected ways. He had been walking along a path lined with maple trees, leaves golden amber against the fading sun, when a sudden wind lifted, sweeping across the ground in swirling patterns. Leaves danced around him, circling and brushing against his legs as though choreographed. Rick closed his eyes and laughed softly. In that moment, he felt a connection so profound it made his chest ache with gentle wonder. The planet itself, it seemed, had acknowledged his presence, playful and tender, like an old friend greeting him after a long absence. From that day on, Rick began to understand that the pulse of the planet was not a force to command or a secret to hoard. It was a rhythm to join, a partnership formed from care, attention, and patience. He learned that he could not rush it, could not demand signs. Instead, he had to remain open, present, and willing to notice the small gifts offered in quiet gestures, a leaf turning in the breeze, a star blinking in the night, a bird alighting on the branch outside his window. In every small interaction, the pulse whispered back to him, reinforcing a truth he would carry for a lifetime. He was not alone, and the world had a way of holding him tenderly, if he only listened. Rick's friends from school remained unaware of this inner world. He tried to explain once to his brother, a little older and more practical, who only laughed and shook his head. "You're imagining things," his brother said. But Rick understood that imagination was not separate from reality. It was the lens through which he perceived the pulse. Some things, he realized, could only be felt, not proven, and perhaps they were better that way. Quiet truths reserved for those willing to notice the small, subtle miracles hidden in ordinary days. By the time Rick was a young teenager, he could walk through forests, fields, and streets without speaking aloud, yet feel the heartbeat of the planet beneath his feet, through the soil, the trees, the wind. Even in moments of sadness or uncertainty, that pulse reminded him of his place in the world, the invisible thread connecting him to everything that lived. He carried it quietly, like a secret note tucked in his pocket, a rhythm that grounded him, even when everything else seemed uncertain. And so Rick's life moved forward, a boy growing into a young man, but always aware of the pulse beneath his skin and beneath the earth itself. It shaped his thoughts, his choices, his quiet compassion toward others. He learned that kindness could ripple through the world, just as surely as the wind rustled leaves or the stars twinkled in the dark. The planet had a pulse, and he had learned to move with it, slowly, attentively, and with care. In this way, Rick's unusual gift, his awareness of something vast and listening, grew quietly, shaping him into someone who understood the subtle music of life. He knew now that the pulse was patient, that it did not rush or scold, but waited and responded with a gentle constancy. And for Rick, that constancy became a home, a steady anchor in the soft, unpredictable tide of his days. By nightfall, when the sun had slipped behind the horizon and shadows stretched long and thin, Rick would sit on the hill behind his house listening for the pulse of the world, the quiet breath of earth and sky. And in those moments, he understood a simple truth, one that would guide him for the rest of his days. To be aware, to care, and to notice, even in silence, is to participate in the deepest, most enduring form of love. Rick's world had begun to stretch in quiet, curious ways. The pulse of the planet was no longer merely beneath his feet. It seemed to float around him in whispers of wind, in the brush of leaves, and in the soft shimmer of clouds overhead. He discovered that even the sky could be part of this conversation, a canvas that answered him when he spoke without expectation. Some afternoons, when the sunlight spilled warm and gold across the fields, he would lie on the grass and watch the clouds drift, imagining them as delicate sandwiches stacked just for him. It was an odd thought, and he would smile at it, but somehow it felt like the clouds were listening, folding the world into a gentle, comforting rhythm. He began bringing small tokens with him on these walks, bits of bread, scraps of cheese, sometimes fruit he had saved from lunch. He would set them on the grass as though offering a gift to the sky, whispering quietly, "Here, just for you." Sometimes a bird would come, picking delicately at the offerings, and Rick would laugh softly. Sometimes the clouds themselves seemed to shift in recognition, stretching and folding like they had understood him. These small acts became rituals, a way to honor the pulse he had discovered in the world. Even the simplest moments, the breaking of bread, the passing of clouds, carried the weight of quiet wonder. Night, as always, brought a different kind of magic. When the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars blinked awake, Rick would lie on his back counting constellations, humming tiny songs to the rhythm of his heartbeat. The stars became notes in his private symphony, each one a soft reply to the words he had whispered into the night since childhood. "I hope you're listening," he murmured, though he already knew they were. Sometimes he imagined the stars singing back, a lullaby of twinkling lights, slow and measured, comforting him with their patient presence. It was during one such evening, with the moon casting a silver glow across the fields, that Rick noticed a pattern emerging in the sky. Certain stars seemed to linger longer when he hummed the melodies he had created, twinkling in gentle response. Others appeared to pulse more brightly when he whispered small worries or wishes. It was as if the universe itself had learned to converse with him, not in words but in rhythm, light, and quiet resonance. He felt no need to speak aloud. Silence, he now understood, could be the most intimate kind of dialogue. Rick shared these discoveries with no one. Most would have dismissed them as childish fancy, yet he did not mind. The rituals were his alone, and their value lay in the private, sacred communion they created. At school, his classmates tumbled through life, oblivious to the soft rhythms surrounding him. Rick did not envy them. He had discovered a depth in quiet observation, a richness in noticing small details that others overlooked. The pulse of the planet, the dance of clouds, the songs of stars, all were teachers, guiding him with gentle insistence toward patience, empathy, and a sense of wonder that nothing in the ordinary world could replace. Some days, he would experiment, placing objects in odd arrangements, a pebble next to a flower, a stick balanced carefully on a log. Then he would step back and watch the clouds shift, as though the sky were nudging his creations into subtle transformation. The pattern was not obvious to anyone else, but Rick noticed. Leaves would fall differently. Shadows would stretch in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Even the air itself felt infused with quiet laughter, as if the planet itself approved of his small, deliberate gestures. Rick's brother, older and less attuned to the hidden pulse, occasionally asked questions that made him pause. "Why do you do that?" he would say, seeing the careful placement of objects or the whispered melodies to the stars. Rick would only smile, a quiet, private smile, and reply, "It listens." His brother would shake his head, chuckle, and walk away. But Rick did not mind. He understood that some gifts were meant to be shared only with the world itself, not with those too rushed to notice, and so the days passed in a rhythm of quiet wonder. He would watch clouds drift by, lay sandwiches in soft offerings, hum to the stars, and let the pulse of the planet surround him. These rituals did more than soothe him. They shaped the very core of his being. He was learning patience, empathy, and the gentle art of noticing. He discovered that love, even in its most silent forms, could be felt deeply and returned in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. He had begun to understand that the smallest acts, a smile, a whispered song, a sandwich offered to the clouds, were not meaningless. They were threads in a tapestry of connection that stretched far beyond his understanding. One evening, as the wind carried the scent of rain across the fields, Rick lay on the grass and listened. The sky was a deep violet, the stars blinking awake one by one, each pulse like a heartbeat in tandem with his own. Clouds drifted lazily across the horizon, silver-lined and soft as though folded from moonlight. He hummed a melody, a simple, lilting tune he had created to honor the rhythm of his days. And from the world around him, the soil, the trees, the breeze, the stars, he felt a quiet response. The planet pulsed in tandem with his song, acknowledging his presence, his care, his small but meaningful gestures. Rick realized then that he was not merely observing the world. He was participating in it, in the gentlest possible way. Each cloud sandwich, each star song, each whispered melody was a note in a vast symphony of life. And though no one else might hear it or understand, the act of listening and responding, giving and noticing, made him feel a belonging deeper than any school friendship, deeper than any praise or reward. He was part of a conversation older than him, older than the hills, older than the stars themselves. The boy, no longer quite so small, though still tender in heart, rose slowly, brushing the grass from his hands. He felt the pulse everywhere, beneath his feet, above his head, threading through every leaf and stone. And though he walked home alone, he did not feel lonely. The world was alive, listening, and responding in ways subtle and profound. The ordinary had become extraordinary through his attentiveness, and in turn, he had become extraordinary in his ability to notice, to care, to participate. That night, lying in bed as the moon cast a silver glow across his room, Rick whispered to the ceiling as he had so many times before. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything, for listening, for being here." And in the stillness, the silence seemed to lean closer, brushing against his ears like the soft rustle of leaves in a warm wind. Rick closed his eyes and felt a deep, slow exhale move through him, the pulse of the planet now intertwined with his own heartbeat. He slept knowing, truly knowing, that the world was alive, and that he was a quiet, cherished part of it. Rick had whispered to the world for years, small words carrying the weight of a boy's curiosity, wonder, and loneliness. Some nights, the silence answered with subtle signs, a leaf shifting against the breeze, a star blinking just a fraction longer. But he had never felt anything so clear as the moment that would come one late summer evening, when the world seemed to pause and respond in a way he could not ignore. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth. Recent rain had softened the fields and forests near his home, and the sky was a watercolor of fading sunlight. Rick wandered farther than usual, his bare feet brushing the grass, feeling the pulse of the planet beneath him, steady and comforting. His heart was full of questions he had carried for years. Will I ever feel truly understood? Does anyone or anything hear me the way I hear the world? He whispered these thoughts into the evening, unsure if the wind, the trees, or the soil would answer. Then, as he reached the crest of a small hill, he heard it, a sound so faint, so impossibly gentle, that he almost thought he imagined it. A single note, rising softly, like a bell struck underwater, or the faint vibration of a deep, distant pulse. Rick froze, ears straining. The note was not part of the wind, not part of the creek winding through the field below. It was different, alive, deliberate, patient. His pulse quickened, but there was no fear, only awe. The world, he realized, had spoken back to him. Rick knelt on the damp grass, feeling the soil beneath his hands. He whispered again, unsure whether to speak aloud or simply listen. "I'm here," he said. "I've always been here. Do you hear me?" The answer came not in words, but in sensation. The vibration under his palms deepened, spreading up his arms in slow, warming waves. The breeze lifted his hair, brushing gently against his face, carrying a scent of rain and earth he had never noticed before. Rick's eyes widened. The planet was not just responding. It was communicating in the only language it had, with rhythm, presence, and patience. He stayed there for hours, speaking softly and listening intently, letting the world unfold around him. Each step of his voice was met with subtle shifts. A leaf floated down to rest at his feet. A bird landed nearby, tilting its head as if to study him. The clouds stretched across the sky in delicate folds, mirroring the gentle cadence of his words. Rick understood in that moment that he had crossed an invisible threshold. The pulse of the planet was no longer a distant hum beneath his feet. It was conscious, aware of him and responsive to the intentions he carried in his heart. For the first time, he realized what it meant to be heard completely, not by another human, not by a friend or teacher, but by the living, breathing world itself. And with that realization came a profound sense of belonging. He had spent so long practicing patience, attentiveness, and care, whispering into the night without expectation, that he had earned this moment. The planet had acknowledged him, and in doing so, had anchored him in a connection that would carry him through all the years to come. Rick stayed on the hill until the sun had fully disappeared and the stars began to blink awake. He traced constellations with his finger in the darkening sky, humming a small melody he had created that evening. Each star twinkled in a pattern that seemed intentional, almost playful. He laughed softly, a sound that mingled with the whispering wind. The world was alive, he thought, and it had chosen in some quiet, ineffable way to notice him. That was the first answer, the one that would define his life's gentle rhythm. When he returned home, he carried a new kind of awareness with him. The house felt different somehow, not because anything had changed materially, but because Rick himself had shifted. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light seemed to carry meaning. He paused at the kitchen window to watch the evening settle over the fields, noticing the way the cricket's song rose and fell in harmony with the distant rustle of trees. It was as though the world had taken a deep breath, inviting him into its ongoing, quiet dance. Rick's family noticed little. His parents were busy preparing dinner. His siblings chased one another through the hallways. Yet for Rick, the ordinary had become extraordinary. Even the mundane, the stacking of dishes, the folding of laundry, the soft hum of the refrigerator carried a pulse that echoed the one he had discovered on the hill. Life itself seemed to vibrate with hidden meaning, waiting only for him to notice, to align his own heartbeat with the rhythm of the world. The next morning, Rick returned to the hill with careful anticipation, carrying a small notebook to record his impressions. He did not expect words, for the communication he had experienced was beyond language, but he wanted to honor it, to leave traces of his awareness for himself. He spent hours sketching patterns of clouds, noting subtle shifts in the wind, and recording the songs of birds he could hear in the distance. Every detail, he realized, was part of a vast dialogue between him and the planet, a conversation without speech, but full of intent and care. Over the coming weeks, Rick experimented with ways to nurture this connection. He planted small wildflowers along the edge of the hill, leaving behind scraps of bread as offerings to the birds and insects that visited. He hummed to the stars each evening, letting his melodies drift across the fields. And each night the pulse of the planet responded, sometimes with the faintest vibrations beneath his hands, sometimes with a playful gust of wind, sometimes with a pattern of cloud or star that seemed meant only for him. These responses were never dramatic, never startling. They were subtle, patient, and constant, and that constancy was what made them miraculous. Through this quiet communion, Rick learned something essential. Being noticed, truly noticed, was not about applause or recognition. It was about presence, patience, and care. The planet did not reward him for effort. It simply responded in kind to attention, to tenderness, to the act of noticing. And Rick understood that the same principle could extend to the people he would meet in life. The same rhythm, the same pulse could be shared with others, in small acts of kindness, in gestures of empathy, in listening without judgment. That night, lying in his bed with the moonlight spilling across his room, Rick felt a profound calm. He whispered into the darkness, as he had for so many years, and felt the response ripple back in ways both tangible and invisible. "Thank you," he murmured. "I understand. I hear you, and I will remember." And with that he drifted into sleep, carrying the first answer of his life, knowing that it would guide him for all the quiet, winding years to come. Rick had learned to listen to the pulse of the planet, to notice the faint vibrations beneath his feet, the subtle whispers in the wind and the tiny, deliberate patterns of the clouds above. Yet, even as the world responded to him in gentle, unspoken ways, he felt a quiet yearning for companionship, a human echo of the connections he had begun to feel with the world itself. It was not a longing for loud games or boisterous laughter. No, what Rick desired was simpler, smaller, a presence that could exist alongside his own, without requiring explanation, a rhythm that could move in harmony with his own. That presence came in the form of a classmate named Sam, a boy who was quieter than most, with eyes that seemed to watch and understand without judgment. Their friendship began with small gestures, shared pencils when one broke, a wordless glance that said, "I see you." Sam did not ask Rick to explain the odd rituals of cloud sandwiches or star songs, nor did he scoff at the whispered conversations Rick sometimes had in the schoolyard or on walks home. Instead, he simply sat beside Rick, a steady, patient presence that mirrored the planet's pulse in a human form. Rick cherished these quiet moments, the way a single soft chord can linger after a lullaby has ended. They would walk along the edge of the schoolyard together, stepping over patches of grass, letting the air carry the faint smells of summer rain or autumn leaves. Sometimes they spoke in short, thoughtful sentences. Sometimes they did not. And yet, in those silences, Rick felt the kind of understanding he had previously only found in the world itself. It was in these quiet friendships that he learned something essential. Connection does not always need words. Sometimes it is simply being present, being steady, being attentive to the rhythms of another's heartbeat. Sam had his own subtle quirks, little habits that Rick found fascinating. He hummed to himself when thinking, and his fingers traced patterns along the fence as they walked. Rick began to notice these small things, finding a rhythm in Sam's movements that complemented his own. They became an unspoken duet, a pair of quiet listeners attuned to each other's small signals. Rick sometimes thought that if the planet could see their friendship, it would approve. After all, he had been learning for years how to notice, to respond, to care without asking for return. Sam seemed to do the same instinctively. One afternoon, as the sun stretched golden light across the field near their homes, Rick and Sam lay on the grass, watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. Rick, feeling particularly brave, shared a tiny secret he had never told anyone. The way he sometimes spoke to the stars, how he offered small sandwiches to the clouds, and how the world seemed to respond. Sam listened without interruption, eyes tracing the same clouds, nodding slowly as if he understood perfectly. Then he smiled, faint but full of warmth, and whispered, "I think I hear it too." Rick felt a thrill in his chest, not from surprise, but from the quiet resonance of being fully understood. Their friendship grew slowly, naturally in rhythms that no one else could see. They did not need to compete, to prove themselves, or to entertain one another. They simply existed side by side, attentive to the small wonders of the day. Sometimes they walked silently through forests, listening to the subtle hum of life in the soil, the rustle of leaves, the far-off murmur of a stream. Other times they shared lunches beneath a tree, letting crumbs fall to the earth, half as offerings, half as playful gestures to the world around them. In these moments, Rick realized that friendships, like his whispered conversations with the planet, thrived in patience, attention, and care. Yet, as with all human relationships, there were times when misunderstanding crept in. Sam would sometimes speak in ways Rick could not immediately interpret, or act in ways that puzzled him. At first he felt frustrated, longing for the clear, unambiguous responses he had grown accustomed to from the pulse of the planet. But slowly he remembered the lessons of patience and attentiveness he had been practicing for years. He realized that even when he could not predict or understand another's actions, his presence alone mattered. Being there, listening and caring, even without immediate comprehension, was enough. Rick discovered that quiet friendships were mirrors, reflecting both the strengths and vulnerabilities of those involved. He began to notice how small gestures could carry immense weight: a shared smile after a long day, a hand resting lightly on a shoulder, a whispered acknowledgement of a feeling too large to name. Each of these acts echoed the subtle language he had learned from the planet: presence, attention, care, and patience. He understood that human hearts, like the world itself, spoke in rhythms that required stillness to comprehend. One rainy afternoon, Rick and Sam found themselves under a broad maple tree, listening to the sound of water sliding off leaves, the rhythmic drip of droplets onto the ground. Rick whispered a thought he had carried for weeks: "Sometimes I feel like the world listens better than people do." Sam smiled, tilting his head, and said simply, "Maybe we're learning how to listen together." The words were unassuming, quiet, but they resonated like a soft bell in Rick's chest. It was one of those moments that did not require fanfare or explanation. An understanding settled between them, deep and enduring. As the seasons passed, their friendship became a steady current in Rick's life, a human counterpart to the pulse he had discovered in the world. They celebrated small victories together, comforted each other through disappointments, and shared the quiet joy of noticing wonders that others overlooked. The clouds, the stars, the songs of rivers, they shared these moments gently, without insistence, without expectation. The world around them seemed to hum in acknowledgement, as though pleased to witness two hearts learning to move in harmony with one another. Rick began to understand that quiet friendships, like his connection with the planet, required care and patience. They could not be forced or hurried, only nurtured. And when nurtured, they became a source of gentle strength, a reminder that even in a world full of noise and distraction, deep connections were possible. These bonds did not announce themselves. They unfolded slowly, in gestures, in attentiveness, in shared silences, and in the soft acknowledgement that someone else could truly hear you, even without words. By the end of the year, Rick often reflected on the strange and wondrous pattern of his life, a boy who spoke to clouds and stars, who listened to the pulse of the planet, and who had found in Sam a companion who shared the rhythms of attention and care. Quiet friendships, he realized, were not weaker or less important than dramatic adventures or loud declarations. They were subtle, enduring, and infinitely precious. And in the gentle presence of another, Rick felt that the lessons of the world itself, the patience, the attentiveness, the awareness of the pulse, were mirrored and reinforced in ways that filled his heart with calm, gratitude, and wonder. That night, lying in bed with the faint hum of the world around him, Rick whispered into the dark, feeling the pulse beneath his hands and in the air, and thought of Sam. "Thank you for being here," he murmured softly, and in that quiet exhale, he realized that the first human echo of the pulse had joined him, a steady companion in the rhythm of life, a friend who listened, who noticed, who cared. And in that knowledge, Rick drifted into sleep, wrapped in the gentle certainty that he was never truly alone. Rick's quiet life had begun to shape itself in rhythms both subtle and profound. He walked with Sam through the meadows, listened to the pulse of the planet beneath his feet, and whispered to clouds and stars alike. Yet there remained a yearning, a sense that he had only glimpsed the depth of the world's language. It was during one warm afternoon, when the sun scattered gold across the garden behind his house, that he met someone who would help him understand the pulse in ways he could never have imagined. A mentor, patient, gentle, and quietly extraordinary. The garden belonged to Mr. Alder, an elderly man who lived alone at the edge of the village. Rumor had it he was part wizard, part gardener, part philosopher, but mostly he was simply present. Rick first noticed him tending a row of sunflowers, his hands moving with slow precision, humming a melody Rick could not quite recognize. There was something in the way Mr. Alder paused to watch the light fall across petals, the way he listened to the soil, the way his fingers lingered over each leaf. That made Rick feel as if he had discovered a living lesson in attentiveness. Rick was hesitant at first. He had grown used to sharing his inner world only with the silence of the planet, the stars, and the clouds. Human companions required explanations, often too heavy or clumsy for such delicate matters. But Mr. Alder did not ask for explanations. He simply nodded, smiled, and invited Rick to sit beside him. "The world speaks," he said softly, "if you are willing to listen carefully enough." Rick felt a thrill of recognition, as though he had been waiting all his life to hear those words from someone else. The mentorship began slowly, in unhurried sessions among the roses, herbs, and creeping ivy. Mr. Alder did not offer lessons in the ordinary sense. There were no rigid rules, no tests to pass. Instead, he guided Rick through simple exercises of attention, observing how the wind bent the branches of the trees, feeling the subtle vibration of life in the soil, noticing the way a butterfly rested lightly on a leaf before continuing its journey. Each observation was accompanied by a gentle, whispered reflection from the mentor. "See how it waits, Rick. It waits and responds." Patience is listening in its purest form. Rick began to notice the difference this guidance made. The pulse of the planet, which had always been faintly perceptible to him, now became more vivid, more layered. He could feel the hum of life beneath his hands as he dug in the soil, the way the air carried subtle messages from one part of the garden to another. Mr. Alder would often leave Rick in silence, hands hovering over the earth, to allow him to feel the pulse directly, without interruption. "It is always speaking," Mr. Alder whispered one afternoon. "But you must let it choose how to answer." The mentorship extended beyond the garden. Mr. Alder taught Rick to move through life with the same attentiveness he had cultivated among the plants. "Notice the small things," he said. "They are the footprints of the world's care. They are the conversation of life itself. And when you notice, you are participating in it." Rick found himself applying these lessons in his walks home, in his moments with Sam, even in the quiet hours he spent speaking to clouds and stars. Slowly he realized that the mentor had not given him knowledge to memorize, but a practice to live. Rick also began to understand patience in a new way. The mentor never rushed him, never pressured him to see results. Instead, he emphasized the importance of waiting, of letting connections unfold naturally. "The world," Mr. Alder said one golden afternoon, "is never hurried. We are. Learning to align our pace with its rhythm is the first step toward understanding." Rick felt a quiet joy in this, recognizing the contrast with the hurried, noisy world he sometimes observed in his school and village. Here in the garden, time was measured differently, by the tilt of the sun, the sway of branches, the slow opening of a flower. One day, Rick asked the question he had been carrying in his heart for weeks: "How do I know if it is really listening?" Mr. Alder looked at him, eyes soft and luminous, and said, "Because it responds in its own way when you are patient enough to notice. Sometimes it is obvious, sometimes it is subtle. The measure of listening is not in grand answers, but in quiet acknowledgement." Rick closed his eyes, feeling the truth of this resonate through him, connecting the lessons of the garden to the whispers he had felt in the night and the gentle pulses he had sensed in the earth. Under Mr. Alder's guidance, Rick learned to deepen his awareness. He began keeping small journals of observations, sketching patterns in clouds, recording the rhythms of wind and water, noting the smallest movements of insects and leaves. Each note, each sketch, was a reminder that the world had a language beyond words, and that he could understand it if he approached with care, patience, and presence. He discovered that the pulse of the planet, much like the quiet friendships he had begun to cultivate with Sam, required attentiveness, consistency, and empathy. The lessons were not always easy. There were times when Rick became impatient, frustrated by subtle movements that seemed too slow, or by responses that were too faint. Mr. Alder would notice and simply place a hand on his shoulder. "Patience," he whispered, "is a form of love. The world will answer when you are ready to hear it fully." Rick found comfort in this, learning that struggle and uncertainty were part of the rhythm just as much as clarity and understanding. Every failure, every moment of doubt, became an opportunity to grow quieter, more attentive, more present. By the end of the first season spent under the mentor's guidance, Rick's world had shifted again. The garden became a sanctuary, a place where he could move, breathe, and listen with full awareness. He had begun to integrate the lessons of patience, attentiveness, and subtle observation into every corner of his life. The pulse of the planet now felt like an intimate companion, one that responded to him not just in the night, but throughout his waking hours, through soil, wind, and leaf. And yet, the most important lesson Rick learned was simple. Listening itself is a form of love. To be present, to notice, to wait with care, these small actions mattered more than words, more than explanation, more than results. And in those quiet moments with Mr. Alder, Rick understood that the pulse of the planet, the rhythm of life, and the companionship of those who truly listen were all part of the same enduring truth. That evening, Rick returned home from the garden as the sun dipped below the horizon. He paused at the edge of the field, feeling the gentle vibration beneath his hands, the same pulse that had been there since childhood, but now richer, deeper, more layered. He whispered into the twilight, not asking, not pleading, but simply acknowledging, "I hear you. I understand a little better now. Thank you." And in the soft exhale that followed, Rick felt a warmth that stretched from the earth to the stars, a confirmation that he was moving in harmony with the rhythm of the world, guided by the quiet wisdom of a mentor and the patient pulse that had always been waiting for him. Under Mr. Alder's gentle guidance, Rick began to notice the world in ways he had never imagined. The garden had taught him patience and presence, but now he was learning to feel beneath the surface, literally, to sense the life hidden in the soil, in roots and small burrows, in the quiet architecture of living things. It was as though the pulse of the planet had layers, each one waiting for him to listen closely enough to hear its secret rhythms. Rick spent hours kneeling in the dirt, fingertips brushing against the earth, noticing the tiny vibrations that hummed just beneath the surface. At first it was faint, almost imperceptible, A subtle warmth, a gentle tug, a faint shiver moving through the soil. But as he concentrated, tuning his attention and breathing slowly, the whispers grew clearer. He began to sense the roots of plants stretching and flexing, drawing water and life, communicating in patterns he could feel rather than see. The soil was alive, rich with language, and it spoke to him in pulses, rhythms, and quiet insistence. One late afternoon, Rick sat by the row of marigolds Mr. Alder had planted along the edge of the garden. He pressed his palms against the earth, inhaling the warm scent of sun-soaked soil. Slowly, deliberately, he tried to follow the faint tug he felt beneath his hands. And then it happened, a tiny movement almost like recognition. The roots of the marigold seemed to shift in response to his attention, stretching gently toward him as though acknowledging his presence. Rick gasped softly, heart pounding, and whispered, "I hear you. I'm listening." The soil seemed to hum back, subtle and alive, confirming that he had found a new way to communicate with the world. Over the following weeks, Rick's skill deepened. He learned to sense the currents of water flowing beneath the surface, to feel the way nutrients moved through roots, and even to detect subtle vibrations caused by distant animals moving through the earth. It was as though the roots themselves were a secret network, sharing information and messages that only those who listened with care could comprehend. Rick felt humbled and awed. The world was alive in ways far more intricate and tender than he had imagined. He shared nothing of this with anyone else, not even Sam. Human minds were not yet attuned to such subtle whispers, and he had learned from experience that explaining would often do more to frustrate than enlighten. Instead, he carried his discoveries quietly, as if the earth itself had entrusted him with a sacred secret. Each session in the garden became a dialogue, a meditation. He would place his hands against the soil, breathe and feel the pulse of life respond. Sometimes the response was immediate, sometimes it was slow, like a patient teacher waiting for him to notice. One evening, as twilight brushed the garden in muted purples and golds, Rick knelt beneath the largest oak tree, hands pressed into the damp earth. Mr. Alder had said, "The roots know everything that is patient enough to watch. Listen and they will teach you." Rick closed his eyes, letting his mind quiet, and suddenly he felt it, the subtle tug of roots weaving beneath him, shifting almost imperceptibly. A soft melody seemed to rise through the soil, a rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart. The roots were speaking, not in words but in presence, motion, and vibration. Rick understood that this was a form of intimacy, a communion of life that required nothing but attentive care. Rick's awareness of roots began to extend beyond the garden. He noticed the subtle tremors beneath his feet as he walked through the forest near his home, the way trees leaned slightly toward streams, the faint pull of water traveling underground. He began to sense how the plants communicated with one another, how their movements were deliberate, gentle, and responsive. Each discovery reinforced what he had learned from Mr. Alder. Listening carefully, noticing patiently, and responding with care was a form of dialogue deeper than speech. It was not magic in the traditional sense, nor was it power in any dramatic way. It was understanding, empathy, and attentiveness made tangible. Rick realized that every living thing, root, tree, bird, or river, carried messages that could be heard by those willing to slow down, to feel, and to notice. The pulse of the planet had many layers, and he was beginning to sense one of its deepest, the intricate, patient language of roots, quietly sustaining life and speaking in rhythms older than humans could measure. Rick also began to sense the subtle needs of the plants. He noticed when a patch of soil was too dry, when roots were crowded and searching for space, when a plant seemed to respond more fully to the placement of sunlight. He learned that attentiveness mattered, that even the smallest gestures, watering, repositioning a seedling, offering shade, were acts of care that the earth could feel. And in return, the world responded with subtle signals, a root bending toward him, a flower tilting its petals as though in recognition, the soil humming faintly beneath his hands. This new form of connection enriched Rick's other relationships as well. When he spent time with Sam, he began noticing subtleties he had missed before. A slight hesitation in a friend's voice, a quiet shift in posture, the unspoken message carried in a shared glance. He realized that the language of roots and the pulse of the planet had taught him patience, attentiveness, and empathy that could be mirrored in human connections. Life, he discovered, spoke in many registers, some loud and immediate, some quiet and invisible, and listening with care mattered in every one of them. One early autumn morning, Rick knelt in the garden with Mr. Alder, feeling the last warmth of sunlight on his back. "Do you feel it?" the mentor asked softly. Rick nodded, pressing his palms into the earth. "Yes," he whispered. "I feel the rhythm of everything, the roots, the soil, the water. It's like a heartbeat beneath the ground." Mr. Alder smiled, eyes twinkling with approval. "That heartbeat," he said, "is always there. It is patient, constant, and kind. And now you know how to speak with it, to honor it, to participate in it. Remember, the roots never stop listening. Neither should you." Rick left the garden that evening with a sense of wonder he could hardly contain. The world beneath his feet felt alive in a way that was intimate, personal, and eternal. He understood that the pulse of the planet was not just in the air, the clouds, or the stars, but in the intricate web of life hidden beneath the surface. And he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of learning a language older than him, a gift that would guide him in every step, every interaction, and every whisper of his life to come. As night fell, Rick lay on his bed and pressed his hands together, imagining the roots stretching beneath the earth, touching him, responding to his presence. He whispered softly into the quiet room, "Thank you for letting me listen and for letting me understand." And in the gentle exhale that followed, he felt a pulse beneath his hands, a hum in his chest, a connection that was patient, eternal, and full of quiet wonder, a secret language shared between a boy and the living world itself. Rick had learned to listen to roots, to feel the pulse of life beneath his hands, to sense the quiet rhythm of the earth. Yet the world still held new languages for him to discover. One afternoon, drawn by the gentle murmur of water from the nearby river, he wandered through the forest, letting his feet carry him over mossy stones and under arching branches. There, in the soft light of the sun filtering through leaves, he found a new rhythm to follow, a lullaby that flowed, endless and calm, in the heart of moving water. The river's song was subtle at first, just a whisper beneath the rush of the wind through the trees. Rick knelt at its edge, fingertips brushing the cool, clear surface. He could feel the pulse of life beneath the water, faint vibrations traveling through the stones and mud. It was as if the river itself was breathing, sending tiny waves of awareness that tickled his palms and ankles. Rick closed his eyes, letting the sounds and sensations envelop him. It was not music in any ordinary sense. It was the language of patience, of presence, of water flowing in ways older than memory. He began to visit the river daily, learning to notice its subtle changes, the way the sunlight danced across ripples in the morning, the way currents whispered over submerged stones, the occasional gleam of a fish breaking the surface with delicate motion. Rick noticed that the river responded differently, depending on his mood. When he approached with care, speaking softly to the water, the current seemed gentler, more playful. When he was restless or anxious, the ripples became uneven, tugging at his attention, teaching him the same lesson he had learned from roots and clouds. The world responds to presence, patience, and awareness. The river became a teacher in its own quiet way. It taught him rhythm and timing, the ebb and flow of life, and the importance of observation without interference. Rick would lie on his stomach at the riverbank, pressing his hands into the mud and letting his ears drink in the subtle variations of sound. Sometimes a fish would glide close, curious about his presence. Sometimes a leaf would float by, moving with the current's gentle insistence. Rick realized that every element of the river, the stones, the mud, the water, the plants along its edge, was part of a larger symphony of life, and he could feel himself woven into it, one note among many. On particularly quiet afternoons, he would hum a melody to the river, a tune drawn from the rhythms of his heartbeat and the whisper of the wind. At first it was a simple sound, almost accidental, but over time he noticed a subtle response, ripples forming in delicate patterns, leaves spinning briefly on the water's surface, small currents dancing in gentle arcs. The river's reply was not hurried or dramatic. It was patient, attentive, and intimate. Rick realized that listening and responding were acts of mutual care, not domination or control. The river's lullaby was a conversation, just as the roots had been, just as the pulse of the earth had always been. Rick began to carry these lessons into other areas of his life. In his friendship with Sam, He noticed the quiet rhythms of conversation, the unspoken cues, the pauses and soft breaths that carried meaning without words. He understood that patience, attentiveness and care were not only ways to listen to the world, but also ways to listen to others. The river's lullaby taught him empathy in its purest form. Presence without expectation, awareness without interference, attention without judgment. These lessons were subtle but transformative, shaping the way he moved through life with care and quiet reverence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of amber and violet, Rick knelt beside the river, pressing his hands into the warm, smooth stones. He whispered to the water, sharing thoughts he had never voiced aloud. Questions about life, curiosity about the pulse of the planet, and gratitude for its patient attention. The river responded with gentle ripples, delicate movements that seemed almost deliberate. Rick felt a quiet exhale of understanding move through him, a confirmation that he had discovered another layer of connection, another pulse, just as real and tender as the one in the soil or the whispers of clouds and stars. Rick realized that the river's lullaby was not confined to this place. He began to notice the echoes of its rhythm in unexpected corners of the world. The slow drip of rain from a roof, the distant rush of water over rocks in a forest stream, the soft trickle of water from a garden hose. The lessons he learned at the river extended beyond its banks, teaching him that attentiveness, patience, and care could reveal the extraordinary in the ordinary, the unseen in the familiar, and the miraculous in what others might overlook. The river also reminded him of impermanence. He noticed how currents shifted, stones moved, leaves floated away, and the water never remained the same from one day to the next. It taught him that life, while steady and enduring in its rhythms, was also changeable, fluid, and resilient. Rick understood that this was part of the quiet wisdom he had been gathering since childhood, that connection was not ownership, that presence did not mean permanence, and that love could exist in motion, in care, and in the willingness to notice and participate without clinging. As the seasons shifted, Rick's time by the river deepened his understanding of the world's pulse. He began to experiment with gentle offerings, small stones arranged in patterns along the edge, leaves laid carefully in the current, tiny songs hummed to match the water's flow. The river seemed to acknowledge each gesture in subtle ways, and Rick discovered that the act of noticing, of participating without expectation, created a quiet joy that no outward applause could match. The river became a sanctuary, a place of reflection, and a teacher that would stay with him always. One late autumn evening, as chill crept into the air and the stars began to blink awake, Rick lay on his back at the riverbank, listening to the soft, continuous song of water moving over stone and mud. He felt the pulse beneath his hands in the water and in the soil at the edge of the bank. He whispered softly into the night, "Thank you for teaching me, for being patient, for letting me listen." The river's response was a gentle shiver across the surface, a quiet ripple that traveled to his fingertips, and Rick smiled. He understood then that these moments of awareness, patience, and connection were the truest form of companionship the world could offer. That night, as he walked home beneath the moonlit sky, Rick carried the river's lullaby in his chest. It intertwined with the rhythms of roots, clouds, stars, and soil that he had learned to hear, forming a symphony of quiet awareness that shaped every step. He understood that the pulse of the planet was not singular, but layered, and that each layer had its own language, the whisper of roots, the song of rivers, the flicker of stars, the dance of clouds. And he, patient and attentive, was becoming fluent in each of them. Lying in bed that night, Rick closed his eyes and imagined the river flowing endlessly beneath the stars, carrying a song older than himself, a melody patient, constant, and kind. He felt the pulse ripple through him, slow and steady, connecting him to the earth, the sky, and all the small living things he had come to notice. He whispered softly, "I hear you. Thank you for letting me listen." And in the gentle exhale that followed, he drifted into sleep, cradled in the lullaby of rivers, rooted in the pulse of the world, and at peace with the quiet, endless conversation of life. Rick had learned to listen to the world in ways most people never notice, the pulse beneath his feet, the whispers of roots, the lullaby of rivers, the songs of clouds and stars. But human hearts, he was discovering, had rhythms of their own. He met Lila on a golden afternoon, when sunlight poured through the windows of the library, dust motes drifting lazily in the air like tiny dancers. She had a quiet presence, gentle and unassuming, yet full of a warmth that Rick felt immediately. Their friendship began in silence, shared glances over pages of books, small smiles exchanged as they passed notes during class. Rick did not yet understand that this was the beginning of something deeper, something that would carry a quiet ache alongside its joy. Lila had a way of noticing the smallest details, the tilt of his head as he read, the subtle smile he gave the river's song, the way he lingered at the edge of the garden. And in noticing, she responded not with words, but with presence, a kind of quiet attentiveness that mirrored the pulse of the planet he had spent his life learning to hear. They spent afternoons exploring fields, forests, and riverbanks together. Rick introduced her to the rituals that had become second nature to him, the gentle offerings to clouds, the whispers to stars, the slow attentiveness to roots and water. Lila listened with patience, curiosity, and a quiet delight. She did not laugh at him, nor did she demand explanations. She simply observed, sometimes asking questions in soft, thoughtful tones. And in those questions Rick felt seen, understood, and connected in a way that mirrored his conversations with the world itself. The first time he realized he cared for her differently, it was a subtle, almost imperceptible moment. They were sitting by the river, the water reflecting the evening sky in liquid gold and violet. Lila laughed softly at something trivial, a sound that felt to Rick like a tiny bell inside his chest. He felt a tug, not unlike the pull he had felt from the roots beneath the soil, the currents of the river, or the gentle nudge of a cloud. It was the first echo of affection, a rhythm that intertwined with his own pulse. He could not name it fully, but he understood that something inside him had shifted. As the weeks passed, Rick found himself thinking of her in the spaces between their meetings, during quiet walks through the garden, while humming melodies to the stars, while listening to the slow, steady pulse of the earth. Lila's presence became a quiet companion in his inner world, a harmony woven into the larger symphony of roots, rivers, clouds, and stars. And yet, with this tenderness came vulnerability. He had always been attuned to subtle pulses and whispers. Now he felt the delicate ache of attachment, the awareness that the heart, like the earth, could be touched, moved and altered by gentle, unseen currents. Then came the first distance. Lila's family moved to another town, far away, leaving Rick with an unfamiliar ache he had never encountered with the planet or the river or the clouds. There was no response from the world that could soothe the loneliness fully, no pulse beneath his hands that could replace the rhythm of human companionship. He walked the familiar fields alone, whispering to the clouds and the river, offering sandwiches to drifting petals and leaves. But the ache remained, a tender gap that reminded him of how much he had come to care. Yet, in that distance, Rick discovered something new. He began to write letters to Lila, simple, unhurried notes filled with observations, the tilt of the sunlight on the river that morning, the clouds stacked like gentle sandwiches, the small melody of roots shifting beneath his hands. He sent them with no expectation of immediate reply, understanding that communication, like the pulse of the planet, required patience, attentiveness, and care. And when her letters arrived, filled with quiet reflections and small wonders she had noticed in her own new surroundings, Rick felt the delicate joy of resonance, the human echo of a pulse he had long learned to hear in nature. Through the months of separation, he discovered that love, like the rivers and roots he had learned to listen to, did not require proximity to be real. It was not loud or dramatic, but subtle and enduring, threaded through attentiveness, patience, and quiet understanding. The world around him, the soil beneath his fingers, the water slipping through stones, the stars blinking overhead, seemed to affirm this. He realized that caring deeply for another, even across distance, could be its own rhythm, a melody that traveled invisibly, carried by thought, memory, and quiet attention. Rick also noticed how his own growth mirrored the world's patient rhythms. The ache of missing Lila was a teacher, reminding him to pay attention, to care without expectation, and to embrace both presence and absence as part of life's larger harmony. He understood that relationships, like the pulse of the planet or the song of the river, required time, patience, and attentiveness. Love could be felt in gestures, in letters, in thoughts carried across distance, and in quiet acknowledgement of another's presence, even when that presence was not physically beside him. One night, lying on the roof of his house under a sky full of stars, Rick hummed the melodies he had created for the river and clouds. He whispered softly into the darkness, "I hope you hear me. I hope you're safe. I hope you feel the same pulse I do." In the gentle exhale that followed, he felt a resonance not from the planet, not from the river, but from within, a quiet certainty that the connection between hearts could persist, patient and enduring, even across miles and seasons. He understood, too, that first love was not only about joy, but also about gentle sorrow, reflection, and growth. The tenderness he felt for Lila expanded his capacity for empathy, his ability to notice subtle rhythms in others, and his understanding of the quiet, patient language of care. Just as he had learned from roots, rivers, and the pulse of the earth, human hearts too could communicate in ways subtle, intricate, and enduring. Love, he realized, was a melody woven through presence, attention, and understanding, a lullaby that could cross any distance. By the time winter arrived, Rick had grown in ways that were invisible to everyone but himself. He had learned that absence could teach, that longing could deepen understanding, and that quiet attentiveness was the truest form of love. He carried Lila's memory, letters, and shared moments with him like small tokens of the world's pulse, reminders that human hearts, like rivers and roots, moved with rhythms that could be felt and honored, even when unseen. That night, lying beneath a blanket of stars, Rick whispered to the quiet sky, to the pulse of the planet, and to the memory of Lila, "I understand a little more now. I hear you, and I will carry this care even across distance." And in that gentle exhale, he drifted into sleep, cradled by the lullabies of rivers, roots, clouds, and hearts alike, knowing that love, quiet, patient, enduring, had become part of the rhythm of his life. Rick had spent years learning the language of the world. Roots, rivers, clouds, and stars all spoke to him in rhythms of patience, care, and quiet attentiveness. By now he had begun to understand that his connection to the planet was something deeper than curiosity or childhood wonder. It was a dialogue, a slow dance of presence and care, a communion of attention that transcended words. And in this realization, he discovered a way to love without urgency, to move with the gentle rhythm of the universe itself. It began one evening under a sky streaked with the faint glow of twilight, when the first stars began to blink awake. Rick lay on the soft grass, feeling the pulse of the planet beneath him, listening to the subtle vibrations of the world in quiet harmony with his own heartbeat. He stretched his arms toward the heavens, as if to greet the first flickers of light, and whispered a thought he had held for years. "I want to move slowly with you, to notice everything, to dance with your presence." And so began what Rick would come to call the Star Slow Dance, a series of long, deliberate exchanges between himself and the living world. He did not rush, did not demand answers, did not expect immediate recognition. Instead, he moved with patience, letting each moment unfold naturally, noticing the gentle pulses and subtle responses that only a quiet heart could perceive. A cloud shifted in reply. A leaf trembled slightly in the evening breeze. A distant star twinkled with a timing that seemed deliberate, almost intimate. Each response was a note in the slow melody of connection he had cultivated over years of attentiveness. Rick came to view this dance not as a performance, but as participation. Every evening he would find a quiet space in a field or on a hilltop, hum a soft melody, offer a small gesture, a handful of leaves, a leaf shaped like a star, a whispered wish, and wait. And the planet, in its infinite patience, responded with subtle signs, patterns in the clouds, faint tremors beneath his hands, the careful arrangement of fallen petals. Each movement was deliberate but slow, never urgent, as if the world were teaching him the true meaning of presence and attentiveness. It was in this rhythm that Rick discovered a new depth to empathy. The dance required him to feel without judgment, to notice without interference, and to respond with care rather than expectation. He learned that love and connection were not defined by intensity or grand gestures, but by patience, attentiveness, and the willingness to notice, to wait, to honor the subtle pulses of life. And in return, the world's responses, slow and deliberate, taught him humility, reverence, and awe, Some nights Rick would close his eyes and imagine the universe moving with him, stars gliding slowly across the sky, clouds curving like gentle arcs, roots stretching beneath the earth in synchronized rhythm. He felt the pulse beneath his hands and feet, align with the pulse of the planet, a subtle duet of presence and care. Each inhalation and exhalation became a measure of this slow dance, a reminder that communication, whether with roots, rivers, stars, or hearts, was never about haste, but about resonance. The star-slow dance also became a meditation on time. Rick realized that moments of care, observation, and connection could stretch infinitely when they were unhurried. The world was never impatient. It allowed him to move at his own pace, to explore each rhythm fully. And in this understanding, Rick felt a quiet joy unlike anything he had known, a sense of intimacy and belonging with something far larger than himself, something eternal and patient. Sometimes he would carry small offerings with him, a piece of bread to leave for birds, a carefully stacked pile of stones, or a whispered melody to accompany the evening winds. These gestures were not meant to impress or to control, but to participate, to honor the quiet pulse of the world. And in each subtle response, a feather drifting toward him, a leaf tilting just so, a star blinking twice as if in acknowledgement, Rick felt the reciprocity of the dance. It was a dialogue in which every movement mattered, yet no single gesture was hurried or dominant. Rick noticed that this slow, deliberate attention began to influence his other relationships. With Sam, he became more attuned to the pauses, gestures, and quiet cues that carried meaning beyond words. With Lila, though she was far away, he learned to honor the space between them, cherishing each letter and memory as part of the ongoing rhythm of care and presence. And within himself he cultivated patience, awareness, and empathy that he had not previously understood, recognizing that the same principles of attentiveness applied to both the world and the hearts within it. One evening, as twilight bled into deep indigo, Rick lay on the hill and let the stars' gentle flicker guide him. He hummed a melody in harmony with their rhythm, feeling the pulse beneath his hands resonate with the pulse of the universe. A gentle wind rose, brushing against his cheeks, carrying the faint scent of soil, water, and distant flowers. Rick understood that the dance was mutual. His presence invited the world's response, and the world's response invited his awareness, creating a slow, endless cycle of connection and care. The star-slow dance also taught him the value of impermanence. Each moment, while lasting in its depth, was fleeting in its form. A cloud might drift away, a star might vanish behind the horizon, a leaf might fall before he could notice. And yet, each of these transitions carried beauty, significance, and meaning. Rick learned that connection was not ownership, that presence was not permanence, and that love, patience, and attentiveness could exist fully, even in the quiet acknowledgement of change. By the time the night deepened and the stars fully claimed the sky, Rick's body lay still, but his awareness stretched across the field. The river, the garden, and the world beyond. He whispered softly into the night, "I see you, I hear you, I am here with you." The pulse beneath his hands answered faintly, deliberately, like the soft exhale of a patient friend. Rick felt the resonance ripple through his chest, a warmth that was both quiet and infinite. He had discovered a rhythm of connection that was tender, enduring, and profoundly alive. And in the stillness before sleep, Rick understood a truth he had only glimpsed before. The world's pulse, the rhythm of stars, rivers, roots, and hearts, all spoke the same language of care, patience, and presence. To participate in it, to notice without expectation, to respond with quiet attentiveness was to dance slowly with the universe itself. And as he drifted into sleep, cradled by the gentle pulse of the planet, Rick felt the certainty of belonging, intimacy and enduring connection, a slow, infinite dance that would accompany him through every quiet hour of his life. Rick had grown into a life attuned to subtle rhythms. The pulse of roots beneath his fingers, the lullaby of rivers, the quiet conversations with stars and clouds, all of it had shaped him into a boy who listened deeply, who noticed the invisible threads connecting life. And yet, there was another rhythm he could not control, one that came not from the world but from within himself, a soft, persistent loneliness that sometimes hovered like mist over a quiet valley. It was not a loneliness of sadness alone. It was layered with wonder, a bittersweet recognition that he moved through life differently, that his pulse resonated with frequencies others rarely noticed. At school, he often felt separated from the chatter of children and the loud clamor of the ordinary. He could hear whispers of wind through a cracked window and feel the subtle tremor of roots beneath the playground, while others laughed and ran, unaware. He did not resent them. He simply observed, aware of the distance that came from being attuned to things invisible. Some afternoons, he would walk alone along the edge of the river, pressing his hands against stones and soil, listening to the currents as they spoke in soft, patient pulses. The river did not judge his solitude. It welcomed it. And in that acceptance, Rick discovered that loneliness could be a companion rather than a burden. It gave him space to notice, to reflect, to wonder at the smallest details of the world. It was a gentle teacher, offering lessons in patience, introspection, and quiet presence. The world responded to Rick in ways that were subtle but profoundly affirming. A cloud might drift lazily into a perfect shape. A flower might tilt its petals toward him. A breeze might carry the faint scent of something new yet comforting. These small gestures reminded him that he was not truly alone. The pulse of the planet, the rhythm of rivers, the hum of roots, and the quiet light of stars created an invisible network of companionship that cradled him gently, if differently, than human friends could. Rick sometimes wondered if anyone else experienced the world in such delicate frequencies. He missed Sam, of course, and Lila's letters became small lanterns of warmth in the quiet stretches of distance. But even in their absence, he discovered a resilience, a tender strength that came from listening to the world itself. He began to understand that loneliness and wonder were not opposites. They were companions, intertwined in the same quiet melody of life. One informed the other. Loneliness offered space to notice, and wonder gave beauty to the empty spaces. One evening, lying on the grass beneath the soft glow of the moon, Rick felt a stirring that was both melancholy and comforting. The stars blinked above him, each one distant yet familiar, each one holding a presence that was patient and constant. He whispered softly, "I am here and I am listening. Even if I am alone, I am not lonely entirely." And in the gentle exhale that followed, he felt the pulse of the planet beneath his hands, a faint hum of agreement, a quiet reassurance that presence mattered, even when solitude stretched long and thin. He found solace in small rituals, a sandwich offered to drifting clouds, a careful note to a flower that leaned toward the sunlight, a quiet hum of music for the river. All became acts of connection. Rick realized that loneliness did not diminish the depth of his experiences. Instead, it heightened his awareness, allowing him to perceive subtleties that others overlooked. Every ripple in the river, every tremor beneath his fingers, every flicker of starlight became a conversation, a recognition that he was seen and acknowledged by forces larger than himself. The quiet wonder that accompanied loneliness also nurtured imagination. Rick would lie on his back for hours, watching clouds shift and imagining their slow, deliberate journeys. He hummed melodies to the stars, wondering if they recognized him, responding with subtle twinkles or invisible pulses. Each act of attention, each pause, became a note in a gentle symphony that he alone could perceive fully. And in that symphony, he discovered that he had never truly been alone. He was dancing with the pulse of the world, with rhythms that were infinite, patient and kind. Yet loneliness was not without its tender ache. Sometimes he wished he could share these observations in ways that others would understand. To laugh or marvel together over a stone-shaped shadow, a root's gentle tug, or the way the river's currents shimmered under twilight. But he learned to release the expectation of being understood fully. Instead, he cultivated presence, embracing solitude as a teacher rather than a punishment. And in doing so, he discovered a quiet courage, the ability to witness beauty deeply, to love fully, even when his companions were distant or absent. Rick's wonder became a bridge between loneliness and connection. He noticed the small gestures of life everywhere, the sway of a flower, the hum of wind through branches, the slow drift of clouds across the night sky. He began to understand that even subtle attention could create intimacy, that being present was a form of quiet love. The pulse of the world in all its layers, roots, rivers, clouds, stars, was patient, constant, and receptive. And through this, Rick learned that his own presence, steady and attentive, could be a gift to the world as much as it was a source of solace to himself. One late afternoon, as golden light spilled over the fields, Rick walked slowly along the riverbank, listening to the water's lullaby and feeling the pulse beneath his fingers. He thought of Sam and Lila, of Mr. Alder in the garden, of every small act of care he had offered to clouds, roots, and stars. And he whispered softly into the quiet air, "I am here, I notice. I care." The pulse beneath his hands, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the reflective shimmer of the river responded in a delicate, unhurried rhythm, a reminder that he was part of a larger symphony, steady and true. By the time evening settled, Rick lay on the grass under a sky deep with stars, the quiet ache of loneliness softened by wonder. He understood that life's rhythm required patience, attentiveness, and acceptance of solitude as much as companionship. In those moments he felt a deep resonance with the pulse of the planet, with rivers, roots, clouds, and stars. He whispered one last thought before sleep carried him gently away. "Even in quiet and distance, even in solitude, I am part of something vast. I am seen, I am heard, and I am here." And in the gentle exhale that followed, Rick drifted into a calm, meditative sleep, wrapped in the quiet companionship of the world, cradled by the pulse of life, and comforted by the tender wonder that grew alongside his loneliness. Rick had learned to listen to roots, rivers, stars, and clouds. He had danced with their rhythms, embraced the quiet pulse of the world, and discovered the delicate interplay of presence and care. And yet there was still another layer to uncover, a language older, subtler, and more intimate than words, the language of silence itself. It began one late afternoon in the garden, where Rick often visited Mr. Alder. The mentor had left him alone by the sunflowers, encouraging observation without explanation. Rick knelt in the soil, feeling the faint tremor of roots beneath his fingertips, when he noticed the wind shift slightly. It was a gentle movement, almost imperceptible, carrying no sound but full of suggestion. He realized then that the world spoke even when nothing was said, even when no ripple or leaf or star offered an obvious response. Silence, he understood, was a language. Rick began experimenting with this quiet dialogue. He would sit beneath the largest oak tree for hours, hands resting gently on the earth, eyes closed, breath slow and steady. He did not speak aloud, did not hum melodies, did not leave offerings. Instead, he simply attended, noticing the subtle responses, a leaf leaning closer, a small insect pausing nearby, the faint shiver of roots beneath his hands. He felt understood in ways words could never convey. The world responded not to speech or gesture, but to presence, attention, and careful listening. At first it was difficult. Rick had grown accustomed to observing signals, listening to small sounds and recognizing subtle movements. Silence asked him for more. It demanded patience, surrender, and trust. He learned to quiet his thoughts, to release the expectation of immediate recognition, and to trust the rhythm of the world. And in that quiet surrender, he discovered intimacy, a profound connection that required no articulation, no explanation, only attentive, sustained presence. He carried this new understanding beyond the garden. Walking through the forest, he would pause mid-step, hands at his sides, noticing the shift in air, the subtle rustle of leaves, the faint vibration of unseen creatures. He found that silence itself could carry reassurance, empathy, and recognition. A tree, a river, a star, or even a friend could understand him without the need for words. And slowly, Rick realized that he too could respond in silence, communicating care, presence, and attention without speaking. Rick began practicing this with Sam during their quiet afternoons together. They did not always talk. Sometimes they simply walked, sitting on the grass or by the river, feeling each other's presence. Rick discovered that these silent exchanges carried depth and intimacy beyond conversation. A shared glance, a gentle pause, a simple breath in unison, all became statements of understanding, love, and trust. Words were no longer necessary to convey connection. Silence had become its own eloquence. He experimented with this in the stars, too. One crisp night, lying on a hilltop, Rick stretched his hands toward the infinite sky. No words passed his lips. Only stillness existed, a quiet invitation to the universe. And in response, he noticed subtle signs. The stars seemed to twinkle in careful timing. A distant cloud drifted in a deliberate arc. The wind shifted just enough to brush against his cheek. Silence, he realized, was not absence but presence, an acknowledgement that both he and the world could inhabit, fully and gently, without interruption. Rick also discovered that silence could carry reassurance. When Lila's letters arrived, and he sensed the subtle ache of missing her, he would close his eyes and speak nothing. He simply felt the memory of her presence, held it carefully in his chest, and allowed that feeling to resonate with his heartbeat. The quiet acknowledgement of absence, without complaint or expectation, became a gentle way of keeping love alive across distance. Silence, he realized, could convey longing as tenderly as words could convey joy. In the garden, under Mr. Alder's watchful eyes, Rick learned to combine silence with small gestures. Their leaf offered to a drifting cloud, a stone carefully placed on the edge of the river, a soft breath over roots, all became a part of the language. He realized that words could sometimes interrupt this delicate dialogue. They could demand, explain, or pressure. Silence, by contrast, allowed life to respond in its own way and its own time. And in that space, Rick felt true intimacy, not ownership, not urgency, but a deep, abiding understanding of connection. Rick began to integrate this practice into every part of his life. In friendships, he learned to offer attention without commentary, to sit beside someone quietly without feeling the need to fill gaps with speech. In his observations of the world, he learned to notice without naming, to respond with presence rather than action. And in his own heart, he discovered a patience and calm that words alone had never granted him. Silence became a companion, a teacher, a form of love that was steady, patient, and unwavering. One evening, after a long day of observing rivers and clouds, roots and stars, Rick sat by the riverbank in complete stillness. He breathed slowly, eyes closed, letting the gentle movement of water and the soft pulse of life beneath his fingers guide him. No thought intruded. No sound escaped his lips. And yet he felt a response, subtle and deliberate. A ripple in the water, a leaf drifting closer, the faint shimmer of stars reflected on the surface. He realized fully that the world had been listening all along, and now he was listening back in the purest and most intimate way possible. Silence also taught him reflection. Rick realized that understanding could emerge without explanation, that insight could appear in quiet moments, and that love could exist in observation, attention, and patient presence. It was a slow, enduring process, one that required surrender to the rhythm of life rather than imposition upon it. And in those moments of surrender, Rick felt a profound sense of belonging, not just to the planet, the stars, the rivers, or the roots, but to the delicate web of life itself. By the time twilight deepened into night, Rick lay on the soft grass, bathed in the gentle glow of moonlight. He whispered nothing, offering only his attentive presence to the universe, to roots, rivers, and stars alike. And in the quiet exhale that followed, he understood something new, that silence could carry love, empathy, and understanding in ways words never could. Presence itself was a language, and he had become fluent in its subtle, infinite dialect. Rick drifted to sleep that night, feeling cradled by the pulse of the planet, the lullabies of rivers, and the quiet flicker of distant stars. The language of silence had become a bridge between him and the world, a tender form of intimacy that stretched across time, space, and distance. And as he surrendered fully to sleep, he whispered softly into the darkness, not with words, but with presence. I am here, I notice, I care. And somewhere, the world listened back. Rick had long learned to listen. Roots, rivers, stars, clouds, and even silence had become languages he could feel, understand, and respond to. And yet, he discovered that connection did not need to be confined to subtlety alone. Sometimes it could be playful, gentle, and small in gesture, like the ritual that had begun almost by accident, sharing sandwiches with the sky. It started one bright morning when Rick had packed his favorite peanut butter and honey sandwich, intending to eat quietly under the oak tree. As he sat down, he looked up, noticing the clouds drifting lazily, the light moving across the branches, the soft flicker of distant birds. On a whim, he held the sandwich out toward the sky and whispered, "This is for you if you'd like a taste." He chuckled softly at his own thought, but then paused, waiting. And in the quiet that followed, he felt something subtle, a gentle shiver of air, a ripple in the leaves, the faint acknowledgement of the living world. From that day on, sandwiches became a ritual. Rick began preparing them with care, each bite a meditation, each gesture a message. Sometimes he laid them on a flat stone, balanced carefully in the sunlight. Sometimes he left crumbs along the edge of the garden or on the riverbank. And always he looked up, whispering softly, "For you. Thank you for listening." The world responded in ways invisible yet unmistakable. A breeze that carried warmth, clouds shifting into shapes that seemed deliberate, birds gliding closer as if curious. Rick's sandwiches were never about feeding the sky or the clouds. They were about participation, acknowledgement, and play. In his small acts, he discovered the joy of giving without expectation, of offering care that required nothing in return but attention. The sky, the trees, the river, the stars all seemed to recognize the gesture, responding in quiet, subtle ways. Each sandwich was a conversation, a gentle reminder that life's pulse was present everywhere, waiting to be noticed. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in shades of amber and rose, Rick laid his sandwich on a flat stone at the edge of the garden. He hummed softly, a tune borrowed from the rhythm of the river, and leaned back watching the clouds. He felt the wind shift gently, carrying the faint scent of flowers, earth, and sunlight. A leaf drifted down as if to join him, and Rick realized that his ritual was not just about noticing, it was about presence. By participating fully, attentively, he had entered into a dialogue with the world itself. Rick also discovered that these small rituals carried a deeper resonance. The act of preparing, sharing, and observing connected him to life in ways words never could. He noticed the careful architecture of roots beneath his feet, the soft ripples in the river, the fluttering of birds and insects, and the distant twinkle of stars that would emerge as night approached. Each moment of attentive preparation, each small gesture, became a rhythm of gratitude, a rhythm that mirrored the slow, deliberate pulses he had learned from rivers, roots, and silence. Sometimes he shared his sandwiches with friends, though not in the literal sense. With Sam, he introduced the concept of noticing, waiting, and participating without expectation. With Lila, though far away, he described the ritual in letters, weaving it into the narrative of care and presence that defined their correspondence. And in these exchanges, Rick learned that connection, like his sandwiches, could be playful, tender, and enduring all at once. Presence mattered more than words. Attention mattered more than explanation. Rick even noticed the effect the ritual had on himself. The act of making sandwiches carefully, speaking softly to the sky, and waiting for subtle responses cultivated patience, mindfulness, and a quiet joy. He felt more attuned to the rhythms of the world, more present in each step, each breath, each heartbeat. The small ritual became a meditation, a form of gentle communion with life itself, and a reminder that even the simplest gestures could carry meaning when offered with care. One late afternoon, Rick lay on his back, sandwich balanced on his chest, eyes tracing clouds drifting across the sky. He whispered softly, "Thank you for being here, for noticing, for listening." And the world responded, not with words, but with gentle nudges, a breeze that caressed his cheek, a faint shimmer in the leaves, a ripple through the grass. Rick smiled, understanding that the exchange itself, not the outcome, was the true gift. The language of care, attention, and presence transcended speech. He began to notice subtle patterns in the ritual. Certain clouds seemed to linger longer when he shared a sandwich. The river seemed more playful after he left one near its edge, and stars twinkled with a timing that felt almost like acknowledgement. Rick realized that the rhythm of giving and noticing was a form of dialogue, a slow, deliberate dance between himself and the living world. Each small gesture became a note in a melody of quiet intimacy, a reflection of the patient attention he had cultivated for years. The sandwiches were also a reminder of impermanence and renewal. Some would be taken by birds or wind, others would crumble and return to the earth. Rick did not mind. He understood that connection was not ownership. It was participation. He learned to delight in the act itself, to notice and attend without clinging, and to trust that the pulse of life would respond in kind. And in that trust, he found a quiet joy deeper than any fleeting pleasure. On one crisp evening, Rick left a small sandwich on the stone at the riverbank and watched as clouds drifted lazily overhead, the first stars beginning to blink awake. He whispered, "This is for you. Thank you for noticing." The river rippled gently in response, the leaves rustled softly, and the sky seemed to stretch wider, encompassing him in its infinite presence. Rick felt a profound sense of belonging, a reminder that even the simplest gestures, offered with care and attention, could bridge distance, time, and space. By nightfall, Rick lay on the grass, stomach full of thought rather than food, listening to the soft pulse of life all around him, the hum of roots beneath his hands, the lullaby of rivers, the quiet shimmer of distant stars, and the gentle acknowledgement of clouds drifting across the sky. He realized that his sandwiches, small and playful as they were, had become a ritual of connection, a symbol of patience, presence, and the quiet joy of offering care without expectation. And as sleep approached, Rick whispered softly to the world one last time, "Thank you for noticing, for responding, for being here. I am here too." In the gentle exhale that followed, he drifted into calm, meditative sleep, cradled by the pulse of the planet, the whispers of rivers, the twinkle of stars, and the subtle, enduring presence of the sky itself. Rick had learned to listen deeply, to roots, rivers, clouds, stars, and even silence. He had practiced presence, attentiveness, and gentle offerings, and yet the world had not finished teaching him. One morning, as golden light spilled over the fields and painted the leaves with warmth, he noticed a subtle difference. The world seemed to respond to him in a new way. Not with the ordinary rhythms of wind or water, but with gifts, small, quiet, unmistakable signs that the planet itself was speaking directly to him. It began with a flower, rare and delicate, peeking out from the side of the riverbank. Its petals glowed with a shade of violet he had never seen before, soft and vibrant, as though painted just for him. Rick knelt and touched it lightly, feeling its warmth through the tips of his fingers. There was no message in words, no need for explanation. The flower's presence was enough, a quiet acknowledgement that he had been seen, recognized, and understood by the living world. From that day, the gifts became more frequent. Stones with patterns that seemed deliberate, small clusters of leaves shaped like stars, shells arranged along the water's edge, each one a subtle message, a reminder of the planet's awareness. Rick understood that these were not random occurrences, but gentle responses to his presence, patience, and care. Each gift, however small, carried meaning. I notice you. I acknowledge you. You are part of this world. The river seemed to shimmer more vividly when he approached, its currents creating delicate ripples that mirrored the shape of his gestures. The wind occasionally shifted in ways that brushed against him, as though wrapping him in invisible arms. And sometimes, when he lay on the grass under a quiet sky, he would see clouds fold and stretch into shapes that spoke to his heart. A gentle arch like a bridge, a curl like a smile, a ribbon that seemed to wave in greeting. Rick understood that these were gifts not just for observation, but for connection. A dialogue that transcended words. Rick shared these discoveries quietly with Sam, and later in letters with Lila. He did not need to explain the full depth of what he saw or felt, because the gifts themselves carried their own language. In small gestures, the unfolding of a rare flower, the pattern in a stone, the shimmer of light on water, he discovered that attention, presence, and care could evoke responses that were tender, precise, and deeply personal. The planet, he realized, was participating in the star-slow dance in its own way, offering subtle tokens of intimacy and recognition. Sometimes the gifts were playful. A leaf might drift down just when he reached for it, or a stone might rest at the perfect edge of a root he had been observing. Occasionally, a gentle breeze would stir the petals of flowers in patterns he had not anticipated. These moments, small as they seemed, filled Rick with awe. The world had become a partner in a slow, deliberate dialogue, giving him evidence of its attention, care, and subtle humor. Each gift reminded him that his presence mattered, that he was noticed, and that he belonged. Rick also noticed that the gifts required patience. They did not appear on demand or according to his timetable. Sometimes he waited days or weeks to discover a small sign, a flower blooming in an unusual place, a stone perfectly balanced on a branch, a ripple in the river that seemed orchestrated. These intervals of waiting became lessons in quiet endurance, teaching him that true connection does not rush, does not demand, and does not impose. Gifts, like attention and care, unfold in their own time, in their own rhythms. One afternoon, Rick found a rare flower growing at the riverbank, more radiant than any he had seen before. Its petals seemed to glow in soft layers of color, shifting subtly as if breathing. He knelt beside it, fingertips hovering lightly above the petals, and whispered softly, "Thank you for noticing me." The river rippled gently, leaves trembled, and the wind carried a faint warmth across his cheeks. In that moment, Rick realized that the planet's gifts were not simply tokens, they were acknowledgments of presence, invitations to participate, and affirmations that the quiet rhythms he had cultivated were recognized and cherished. The gifts also deepened Rick's understanding of impermanence. Flowers wilted, stones shifted, leaves drifted away. But in each transition he noticed beauty and meaning. He began to anticipate the gifts not as objects to possess, but as experiences to share and savor. The act of noticing, of responding with gratitude, and of allowing the gifts to move through him became a meditation in itself. He realized that the world's generosity was ongoing, infinite and patient, existing in cycles and patterns that he could participate in but never own. Rick began creating small reciprocations to honor the gifts. He arranged leaves in delicate patterns, hummed melodies to the river, left soft offerings near stones and flowers. These gestures were not attempts to control or manipulate, but to participate fully in the dialogue. And in response, the planet continued to provide subtle signs. Petals aligning into shapes, light shimmering through clouds in unexpected arcs, ripples forming in response to his quiet gestures. The rhythm of giving and noticing became a deeply personal, meditative exchange, a dialogue that transcended words or expectation. Even in daily life, Rick found the lessons of the gifts extending beyond the extraordinary. A branch leaning just so, a ripple reflecting the fading sunlight, a flower bending gently in the wind, all became reminders of the quiet attention, presence and care that shaped life. He noticed that in the simplest gestures, the pulse of the planet spoke in ways both profound and subtle. Every leaf, every ripple, every stone held a message, a token, a gift, if only he took the time to notice. By the time night fell, Rick lay on the soft grass under a sky freckled with stars. He thought of the flowers, stones, ripples, and leaves that had been his companions that day. He whispered softly into the darkness, "Thank you for noticing me, for responding, for giving so generously without expectation." The wind carried a faint warmth, the stars twinkled with subtle timing, and the earth beneath him seemed to pulse gently in rhythm with his own heartbeat. He felt fully, intimately recognized by something vast, patient, and kind, and in the gentle exhale that followed, Rick drifted into sleep, cradled by the gifts of the planet, the whispers of rivers, the hum of roots, the soft patterns of clouds, and the twinkle of stars. He understood fully that presence, attention, and care were not only ways to engage with life, they were invitations to receive and honor the world's generosity. And somewhere, the planet, in all its quiet glory, continued to respond, unseen yet deeply felt in a slow, patient dialogue that stretched across days, seasons, and dreams. Rick had come to understand the world in ways few others could. Roots, rivers, clouds, stars, even silence, they all spoke to him, and he listened with care, patience, and attentiveness. He had danced slowly with the rhythms of the planet, learned the language of presence, and received its subtle gifts. But there came a quiet awareness, a soft burden that settled in his chest, the knowledge that he was different, chosen in a way that no one else seemed to understand. It was not a burden of grief or sorrow. Rather, it was a weight of responsibility, gentle yet persistent, reminding him that seeing, feeling, and noticing came with care. The world had revealed itself to him in delicate ways, offering glimpses of intimacy, presence, and understanding. And with each revelation came the awareness that not everyone could perceive what he perceived. This difference made him both privileged and cautious, tender and hesitant. He could not explain fully, could not demand recognition. He could only carry the knowledge quietly, attending to it with reverence. Rick noticed this soft burden most keenly in moments of solitude. Walking along the river, he felt the hum of water beneath his fingertips, the pulse of roots beneath his hands, the deliberate shimmer of clouds above. He recognized signs, symbols, and small gestures that spoke to him directly, messages of acknowledgement and intimacy from the world itself. But with that understanding came a subtle ache. He could not share it with everyone, and often it felt isolating. Few understood the quiet language of the planet. Few could see its gifts or feel its pulse as he did. Yet he also understood that this burden was a form of privilege. It was a tender responsibility, one that required patience, care, and attentiveness. It demanded that he honor the world's trust, respond with gratitude, and participate fully in the dialogue without expectation. The soft burden reminded him that being chosen was not a reward or a mark of superiority. It was an invitation to presence, to witness, and to cultivate care in ways ordinary life could not always demand. Rick began to reflect on the ways the soft burden shaped his relationships with others. With Sam, he practiced quiet attentiveness, learning to read unspoken signals and offer understanding without words. With Lila, though separated by distance, he sent letters filled with observations, reflections, and subtle gestures of care, mindful not to impose his experiences onto her. And in the garden with Mr. Alder, he learned that presence itself, not explanation, was the most meaningful form of teaching. The burden, he realized, demanded humility and patience, even as it deepened connection. One morning, Rick knelt beside a rare flower along the riverbank. Its petals glimmered faintly in the soft sunlight, delicate and ephemeral. He whispered softly, "I see you, I notice. I will honor you." And in that quiet acknowledgement, he felt the soft weight of responsibility settle over him, the understanding that seeing something rare or subtle was not only a gift, but a duty. He could not ignore the pulse of the world, the rhythms of roots and rivers, the gentle responses of clouds and stars. They had chosen him to notice, and noticing carried its own soft, sacred burden. Rick's awareness of this responsibility deepened during quiet moments in the evening. Sitting beneath the stars, he would feel the subtle pulse of life around him, sensing the world's rhythms and intentions. Sometimes he felt a gentle tug, as if the planet itself were leaning toward him, asking him to respond with care, patience, and presence. He understood that he could not control the responses of the world, could not demand acknowledgement or recognition, yet he could honor the dialogue by simply being attentive, by quietly participating in the unfolding rhythm of life. The soft burden also taught Rick about boundaries. He could not attempt to explain everything, nor could he insist that others perceive the world as he did. He learned to carry the knowledge quietly, to share it selectively, and to respond without expectation. And in this restraint, he discovered a form of freedom. By embracing the gentle weight of responsibility, he was able to engage with the world fully, with tenderness, without feeling the need to justify or prove his experiences. Presence, not explanation, became his guiding principle. Rick also noticed how the burden shaped his inner life. It demanded introspection, reflection, and humility. He learned to observe without judgment, to receive the planet's gifts without demanding more than was offered, and to participate fully in small, quiet acts of care. Each flower that bloomed, each ripple in the river, each shift of cloud or flicker of starlight was a reminder that attention and presence were sacred practices. And the burden, soft and persistent, guided him to approach the world with reverence, patience, and gentle awareness. At times, the soft burden felt heavy, especially when he walked alone through fields or along the riverbank. He would pause, hands pressed against the earth, eyes closed, breathing slowly and deliberately. And in those moments, he felt the delicate interplay of privilege and responsibility, the knowledge that he had been chosen to witness the world in its subtle glory, and the awareness that this witnessing required attentiveness, care, and humility. The burden was not oppressive. It was gentle, like the quiet tug of a star guiding him across the night sky. Rick discovered that this burden was intertwined with love. The more he noticed, the more he cared. The more he cared, the more deeply he perceived. And the more he perceived, the greater the sense of responsibility that rested softly in his chest. It was a cycle without urgency, a rhythm that mirrored the slow dance of rivers, roots, clouds, and stars. The soft burden reminded him that being chosen, being attuned, and being present were gifts to be cherished and honored, not tools to wield or boast about. By the time evening settled and twilight deepened, Rick lay on the grass beneath a sky freckled with stars. He felt the pulse of the planet beneath his hands, the lullaby of the river beside him, and the quiet acknowledgement of roots and clouds all around. The soft burden of knowing settled gently over him, not as weighty obligation, but as a tender companion, a quiet reminder that being attuned to the world required care, patience, and love. And as sleep approached, Rick whispered softly to the universe, to the planet, and to the quiet pulse of life itself, "I understand. I will listen. I will care. I will honor this gift. And in the gentle exhale that followed, he drifted into calm, meditative sleep, cradled by the soft, enduring responsibility of knowing, attentive to the world's subtle rhythms, and comforted by the quiet presence of all that he loved. Rick had spent years learning the delicate rhythms of the world. Roots, rivers, clouds, stars, and silence all spoke to him, and he had listened with care and patience. He had practiced presence, cultivated attentiveness, received the planet's gifts, and carried the soft burden of knowing. And now he reached a new understanding, that his relationship with the planet was real, profound and deserving of love, not the loud, dramatic love of stories or songs, but a quiet, enduring love that thrived in stillness. It began one soft morning when the dew clung to grass blades like tiny lanterns, sparkling in the early sunlight. Rick lay on the hillside, hands resting gently on the earth, and felt the familiar pulse beneath his fingers. For a long moment he simply breathed, listening to the subtle currents of life, the hum of roots, the ripples in the river, the gentle flicker of distant stars still faintly visible in the fading night. And in that stillness, he realized he felt love for the world itself, not as a concept but as a presence, tangible, patient, and infinitely alive. Rick understood that this love required acceptance. He did not need to explain it to anyone. He did not need validation or acknowledgement. It existed quietly, perfectly in the soft exchange between his attention and the world's responses. The twinkle of stars, the sway of leaves, the shimmer of water, and the delicate bloom of rare flowers were all acknowledgments, not gifts to be earned or possessed, but signs that the planet recognized. His care and responded in kind. He began to embrace this love through presence. Every walk through the fields, every moment by the river, every pause beneath a cloud-dappled sky became a gentle act of communion. He whispered nothing aloud, offered no demands, and yet spoke volumes in the language he had come to know so intimately. Presence itself became an act of devotion. Attention became a form of intimacy, and the slow, deliberate rhythms of observation became a meditation in love. Rick noticed that quiet love required patience, much like the star-slow dance he had begun years earlier. He did not rush the rivers, did not hurry the clouds, did not insist that flowers bloom on demand. He learned to receive and respond with gentle care, noticing the smallest movements, the subtlest signals, the quietest acknowledgments. Each instance, however fleeting, carried resonance, and each act of attention deepened the intimacy he felt with the living world. The gifts he had received over the years, flowers, stones, ripples, winds, now felt like affirmations of this love. Each one was a reminder that his care mattered, that his presence could elicit response, and that love could be sustained in stillness, attentiveness, and patience. Rick realized that this was a love unbound by expectation, a love that existed for its own sake, quietly, tenderly, infinitely. Even in moments of solitude, Rick found the embrace of quiet love. He would lie beneath the largest oak, hands brushing the earth, eyes tracing the drifting clouds, heart attuned to the pulse of the planet. Sometimes he felt a gentle shiver of acknowledgement, a breeze that carried warmth, a leaf that curved toward him, a ripple in the river that seemed to match his breath. These moments, subtle and unassuming, were suffused with intimacy, evidence that his presence and attention had meaning in a world that often moved without notice. Rick's love was not limited to the extraordinary. He noticed the quiet beauty in daily life, the pattern of roots beneath a stone, the slow drift of leaves across water, the delicate way clouds bent around distant hills. He began to understand that love was not always a crescendo of feeling, but a constant, gentle presence, an unbroken dialogue of care and attention. To love quietly was to honor existence itself, moment by moment, breath by breath, gesture by gesture. He also began to share this quiet love, not in words but in small intentional acts, humming softly to the river, arranging leaves along a path, placing a stone with care where it might be seen by drifting clouds or passing birds. Each gesture was deliberate, gentle, and unhurried. He realized that love need not be loud to be profound. It need not be dramatic to be enduring. Its power lay in its consistency, attentiveness, and depth. Rick's connection with the planet deepened further when he noticed subtle patterns emerging in response to his love. A flower bloomed longer when he lingered nearby. A leaf swayed differently in the wind as he approached. A ripple shimmered more vividly along the river's edge when he paused in meditation. These responses were not grand or showy. They were quiet, deliberate acknowledgments of his presence, and they deepened the intimacy he felt. Love, he realized, was as much about noticing as it was about giving. He began to meditate on the permanence of impermanence. Flowers wilted, leaves drifted away, stars moved across the sky, and clouds shifted constantly. And yet, the love he felt for the planet did not diminish. It adapted, persisted, and deepened. The quiet acts of observation and care were not meant to control the world or hold on to moments, but to participate in an ongoing dialogue that respected change, flow, and the subtle, enduring pulse of life itself. One evening, beneath a sky embroidered with stars, Rick lay on the soft grass, feeling the earth beneath him and the wind brushing his cheeks. He whispered softly, "I see you, I care. I love you." And in response, the world pulsed gently beneath his hands, shimmered in the river, and quivered in the leaves. Rick felt the embrace of quiet love, a connection that was alive, patient, and tender. It was a love that did not demand acknowledgement, that did not require explanation, that existed fully in the exchange of presence and care. As night deepened, Rick felt his heart expand, held in the rhythm of the planet, the rivers, the roots, and the stars. He understood that love, in its quietest form, required nothing more than attention, participation, and patient awareness. He had cultivated this love over years of listening, noticing, offering, and receiving. It was steady, enduring, and alive, an intimacy that words could never capture, a devotion that existed fully in stillness. And as sleep approached, Rick lay cradled by the soft embrace of the planet, rivers, and stars. He whispered one last thought before surrendering to rest. "I am here. I notice, I love. I am with you." And in the gentle exhale that followed, he drifted into calm, meditative sleep, fully aware that quiet love, tender and unhurried, could sustain him across time, distance, and change. Rick had grown into a life measured by subtle rhythms, roots beneath his fingers, rivers' lullabies, clouds drifting across the sky, and stars blinking in quiet conversation. He had embraced the planet, learned the language of silence, and offered his quiet love. And yet, as days turned into months and months into years, he began to notice another rhythm, the passage of time itself. It moved gently, inexorably, like the slow, steady pulse of the world, reminding him that life, like the river, flowed continuously, changing yet constant. The first signs were small. Leaves he had observed as a boy now drifted down and returned seasonally, subtly altered. Flowers he had loved to watch in bloom faded, their petals curling and releasing back into the earth. Stones shifted slightly in place, shaped by the wind and water. Rick noticed these changes without sorrow. He had learned from the planet that impermanence was not loss but a cycle, a rhythm that allowed life to breathe, to grow, and to respond. Passing time was a teacher, gentle yet insistent, reminding him of the fleeting beauty in each moment. Relationships, too, reflected this flow. Sam had moved to another city, their conversations less frequent, yet still infused with warmth. Letters from Lila arrived in carefully folded pages, each word carrying distance and care, yet marked by time's inevitable shift. Rick observed these changes not with regret, but with appreciation. Presence, attention, and love could bridge distance and years, even as circumstances transformed. Time had its own rhythm, and understanding it required acceptance, patience, and gentle awareness. Rick noticed that the planet's response remained constant, even as life changed around him. The pulse beneath his fingers, the shimmer of water, the sway of clouds, the twinkle of stars, all remained steady, reliable, and patient. It was a quiet anchor, a rhythm unbroken by the passage of days or seasons, and in this constancy, Rick found comfort. The planet's presence reminded him that change need not unsettle, that love could persist across time, and that attentiveness and care were enduring gestures, not fleeting acts. He continued his rituals of observation and quiet communion. Sandwiches for the sky, gentle touches to roots, whispered acknowledgement to rivers and stones. Each act became a marker of time passing, a meditation on continuity. Rick noticed the subtle shifts in the world around him, the way light fell differently at the same hour, the new patterns of river ripples, the evolving shapes of clouds. Each observation was both a celebration of the present and a reminder of the impermanence inherent in all life. The passage of time also brought introspection. Rick reflected on the years he had spent cultivating attentiveness, learning the language of silence, and embracing quiet love. He realized that growth was often subtle, measured not in dramatic leaps but in small, deliberate steps. Every flower observed, every stone placed carefully, every ripple noticed had contributed to a life rich in presence and care. Time, he understood, allowed the world to reveal itself gradually, and in that slow unfolding lay wisdom and depth. Rick observed the changes in his own body and mind as well. His hands carried the faint tremor of age, his hair touched with silver at the edges, and his steps were steadier, more deliberate than in childhood. Yet the pulse of curiosity, wonder, and care had not diminished. The passage of time, rather than dampening his perception, had deepened it. He noticed details that might have passed unnoticed in youth: the subtle warmth of sunlight through leaves, the gentle texture of moss, the faint murmur of roots responding to the wind. Time had refined his awareness, adding layers of depth to his intimacy with the world. Sometimes Rick felt the ache of absence more keenly. Sam and Lila's distance became more pronounced. Friends changed and familiar faces drifted away, and yet the quiet pulse of the planet remained steadfast. Rick came to see that relationships, like rivers, ebb and flow with the passage of time. Presence mattered more than proximity, attentiveness mattered more than constant interaction, and so he embraced change, not as loss but as part of the natural rhythm that shaped all life. Evenings became a sacred marker of time's flow. Rick would lie on the soft grass beneath a sky freckled with stars, listening to the hum of roots beneath him, the lullaby of the river, the gentle sway of leaves, and the subtle shimmer of distant stars. Each night the world shifted slightly. Clouds altered shape, ripples moved differently, and the wind carried new fragrances. Yet the constancy of the planet's pulse offered a reassuring framework, reminding Rick that time's passage was not only inevitable, but beautiful, an opportunity for continued presence and attentive love. Rick began documenting subtle changes for his own reflection. He sketched the movements of clouds, recorded the patterns of river ripples, and noted the shifting angles of sunlight across familiar stones and flowers. These observations were not scientific endeavors, but intimate records of attention, a way to honor the passage of time without trying to halt it. In doing so, he learned that recording change could itself be an act of presence, reinforcing the quiet dialogue between himself and the living world. Through it all, Rick maintained the quiet rhythm of love, noticing the pulse of the planet as it responded to his attentiveness, care, and presence. Time became a companion, not a threat. Its passage emphasized the fragility and beauty of each moment, deepening his appreciation for subtle gestures, gentle gifts, and the enduring dialogue of existence. He understood that his relationship with the world was not bound by age, season, or circumstance, but by presence, attention, and a slow, patient love that spanned all of time's quiet currents. By the time night settled fully and the world was cloaked in gentle darkness, Rick lay cradled by the earth, listening to the soft lullaby of rivers, the pulse of roots, the shimmer of stars, and the sigh of clouds drifting overhead. Passing time had changed him, shaped him, and deepened his understanding of love, presence, and care. And in the gentle exhale that followed, he whispered softly, "I am here. I have seen. I have loved. I will continue to notice." And as sleep carried him away, Rick drifted into calm, meditative rest, enveloped by the steady pulse of the planet, the rhythm of passing time, and the tender, enduring knowledge that love and presence could sustain him through every change. Every season and every fleeting moment, Rick had spent years listening to rivers, roots, stars, clouds, and the quiet pulse of the planet itself. He had learned to offer care through presence, to speak without words, and to love in ways tender, patient, and enduring. And now, as time flowed steadily around him, a new rhythm entered his life, the arrival of another, a young soul eager to observe, learn, and feel the world in ways Rick had come to understand so intimately. It began one quiet morning when Rick noticed a child sitting on the edge of the garden path, eyes wide and curious, sketchbook in hand. The child had wandered from the village nearby, drawn by the whispers of the river or the shimmer of sunlight across the fields. Rick approached slowly, letting his presence settle gently into the space rather than startling or overwhelming. "Hello," he said softly. "I'm Rick. Would you like to see the garden with me?" The child nodded, hesitant at first, and Rick guided them to the soft grass beneath the largest oak tree. He did not rush explanations, offer lessons, or insist on understanding. Instead, he invited quiet observation, watching the sunlight touch leaves, feeling the subtle hum of roots beneath the earth, listening to the lullaby of the river, and noticing clouds drifting lazily across the sky. Rick realized that the first lesson was presence itself, the attentive, patient act of noticing without urgency or expectation. Rick introduced the child to the language of silence, showing them how to sit still, breathe deeply, and feel the pulse of the world beneath their hands. "The world speaks," he said, voice gentle, but often in whispers. "Sometimes it's in the ripple of water, the sway of a branch, or the shimmer of light. You don't have to understand it all at once. You just need to listen." And as he spoke, the child's eyes widened, absorbing the gentle rhythm of attention, learning to feel without needing words to label or define. Together, they practiced small rituals. Rick taught the child how to leave a tiny stone on the riverbank, hum a soft tune to the wind, or offer a crumb of bread to passing birds. Each act was not about reward, explanation, or control, but about participation, a gentle dialogue between the observer and the world. And as they practiced, Rick noticed subtle responses: leaves bending toward them, water rippling in acknowledgement, clouds drifting in gentle arcs. These signs reinforced the quiet, patient intimacy that Rick had nurtured over decades. Rick also shared the lessons of impermanence. Flowers bloomed and wilted, leaves drifted with the wind, and sunlight shifted hour by hour. "Notice," he whispered one afternoon, "that the world changes constantly. Each moment is a gift, and each gift passes. That doesn't make it less meaningful, it makes it precious." The child watched closely, tracing the petals of a flower, feeling the breeze, and beginning to understand that attention and care could be acts of love, even in the face of change. Sometimes Rick shared the more extraordinary aspects of the world. He led the child to rare flowers that seemed to glow softly in hidden corners of the garden, showed them stones etched with delicate patterns by wind and water, and pointed out subtle ripples in the river that seemed almost intentional. He did not explain the magic outright, nor did he rush the child to understand. He simply guided them to notice, to breathe, and to feel the world as he had learned to feel it over many years. Rick noticed the child's delight, small yet profound, in these quiet lessons. A leaf drifting in the sunlight brought giggles. A shimmering ripple across the water brought awe. The gentle touch of a root beneath their fingertips brought wonder. Rick realized that the act of sharing his knowledge, patience, and presence created a new rhythm, one that extended beyond him, connecting generations and expanding the circle of quiet attentiveness. Evenings became a time for reflection and shared stillness. Rick and the child would lie on the soft grass, watching stars twinkle against the velvet sky. He showed them how to feel the pulse of roots beneath the earth, how to hear the river's lullaby, and how to recognize the subtle movements of clouds. In silence, Rick felt the child learning not just to see, but to notice, to participate fully in the dialogue of presence, attention, and quiet love. Rick also taught the child the importance of gratitude. They would whisper soft thanks to the trees, the river, the clouds, and even the stones. "We notice," Rick explained, "and when we notice, we give acknowledgement. That is our way of saying thank you." The child began to understand that gratitude was not only polite expression, but an act of intimate participation, a way to honor the world's gifts and subtle communications. Over time, Rick saw the child developing their own rhythm, independent yet in harmony with his guidance. They learned to sit quietly, sense the pulse of life, and respond with presence and care. Sometimes the child would leave a small gesture, a stone balanced on a root, a flower gently placed near a leaf, a soft hum in the direction of the river. And Rick watched, heart swelling, knowing that the legacy of attentiveness, care, and quiet love was beginning to take root in another soul. Rick also reflected on the humility required in teaching. He did not force understanding, demand acknowledgement, or rush the child to perceive what he had spent decades learning. Instead, he offered space, guidance, and gentle observation, allowing the child to cultivate their own experience. In doing so, Rick realized that sharing a gift did not diminish it. It amplified it, creating a circle of attentive presence that could ripple outward through time. Like waves across the river he had loved since childhood. By the time twilight settled, Rick and the child lay side by side beneath the sky, the hum of roots beneath them, the soft lullaby of the river, and the distant shimmer of stars forming a gentle canopy above. Rick whispered softly, "Notice, listen, be present. Love quietly." The child, eyes wide and attentive, nodded gently, beginning to understand that learning was not about achievement, but about participation in the rhythm of life, in the dialogue between observer and world, in the quiet pulse that connected all living things. And as night deepened, Rick felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Passing time had brought the soft burden of knowing, the embrace of quiet love, and now the privilege of teaching. The next listener, tender and curious, would continue the rhythm, extending the dialogue across generations. And in that continuity, Rick found not only joy but solace, knowing that presence, attentiveness, and care were gifts that could endure, ripple outward, and transform the quiet corners of the world. Finally, as sleep approached, Rick whispered softly to the child and to the planet alike, "I am here, I notice. I care, I love. And now you will too." And in the gentle exhale that followed, he drifted into calm, meditative sleep, cradled by the pulse of the planet, the laughter of a new listener, and the enduring rhythm of quiet love shared across time. Rick had spent decades learning, observing and participating in the quiet rhythms of the world. He had whispered to clouds, traced the pulse of roots, listened to the lullaby of rivers, and felt the steady heartbeat of the planet itself. He had shared his quiet love and passed his attentiveness on to a younger soul. And now he returned to the garden that had shaped much of his understanding, a place once nurtured by the wisdom of his mentor, Mr. Alder, a place that had witnessed his slow, careful growth. The farewell garden was different now. Its paths had deepened with use, stones worn smooth by countless footsteps, petals and leaves forming a soft carpet beneath familiar trees. Rick walked slowly, inhaling the scent of soil, moss, and flowers. Every detail, the subtle curve of a branch, the shimmer of dew on a leaf, the gentle hum of roots beneath the earth, carried memory. Here he had first learned patience, presence, and the language of quiet observation. Here he would plant his memories and reflect on the legacy he had begun to create. Rick knelt beside the first flower bed, hands tracing the familiar contours of earth. He thought of Mr. Alder's lessons, the importance of listening, the beauty in impermanence, the gentle power of attention. He remembered afternoons spent under the oak tree, the soft rustle of leaves, and the patient guidance that had taught him to notice without demanding, to participate without controlling, to care without expecting. Each lesson had rooted itself in him, a quiet foundation that had shaped every subsequent interaction with the world. He began planting memories in the garden, not as literal seeds, but in deliberate gestures and small acts of care. A stone placed just so, a flower tucked into a hidden nook, a path gently cleared of leaves, all became expressions of gratitude, love, and reflection. With each act, Rick felt the subtle pulse of the world acknowledging him, as though the garden itself remembered his presence, his attentiveness, and the slow unfolding of his life. Rick took a moment to sit beneath the old oak, the branches stretching overhead like protective arms. He traced the lines in the bark with his fingers and whispered softly, "Thank you for everything you taught me, for every lesson, every quiet moment of guidance. I will carry it forward." The wind responded gently, rustling leaves as if in agreement, the river nearby shimmering in acknowledgement. In this exchange, Rick understood that the farewell garden was both an ending and a beginning, a place to honor the past and prepare for the continuation of care and attention into the future. He revisited familiar corners, noting subtle changes. Flowers had grown in new patterns, roots had shifted, and sunlight played differently across the paths than it had in years past. Rick felt the passage of time deeply here, but not with sorrow. Instead, he felt reverence. The garden, like life itself, was alive and moving, its evolution a testament to the patient rhythms he had come to understand. He realized that part of saying farewell was acknowledging these changes, embracing them, and weaving them into memory with gentle acceptance. Rick also reflected on the relationships he had cultivated in and through the garden. Sam and Lila, the younger listener, the whispers to clouds, the conversations with rivers and roots, all had been shaped by these early lessons. The garden had been the stage for his growth, the cradle of his quiet attentiveness, and now it served as a mirror for the life he had led. Each stone, each flower, each carefully cleared path became a marker of gratitude, a symbol of lessons learned, and a gift for those who might come after him. He spent hours moving deliberately, creating spaces that invited quiet reflection for anyone who might enter in the future. A small circle of stones for meditation, a cluster of flowers tucked near the river, and a clear view of the distant hills were among his contributions. Rick imagined the next listener discovering these arrangements, feeling the pulse of care, the rhythm of presence, and the invitation to participate fully in the dialogue of life. Each act was not for recognition, but for the continuity of attentiveness and love across time. Rick noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible responses of the garden to his care. A breeze shifted petals toward him, leaves curved gently under his hands. The river rippled in patterns that seemed deliberate. These signs were quiet acknowledgments, not dramatic gestures, and Rick cherished them deeply. The farewell garden was alive with memory, attention, and love, carrying both the legacy of his mentor and the imprint of his own life. It was a living tapestry of lessons, care, and quiet intimacy, and Rick felt a profound sense of fulfillment in participating once again in its rhythms. As the sun lowered in the sky, casting long, soft shadows across the garden, Rick paused beneath the oak and reflected on the continuity of life. The garden was not only a repository of memory, but a bridge across generations. Just as Mr. Alder had taught him, he had now begun to pass knowledge, attentiveness, and love to others. Each gesture, each subtle arrangement of stone or flower, became a symbol of his own quiet mentorship, a gift for those who would come after him to notice, care, and participate in the gentle dialogue of existence. Evening brought a deep, reflective calm. Rick sat on the soft grass, hands resting on the earth, listening to the familiar lullaby of the river and the subtle pulse of roots beneath him. He watched the first stars emerge, twinkling faintly against the deepening sky. The farewell garden, alive with memory, change, and subtle acknowledgement, seemed to breathe alongside him. In its quiet rhythm, he found both solace and inspiration, the assurance that his presence, attentiveness, and care had been meaningful, and the knowledge that the legacy of quiet love would continue beyond him. Rick spent one final hour in silent reflection, walking slowly along each path he had tended, touching each stone, observing each flower, and acknowledging every gesture of growth and change. The garden was both a mirror and a promise, a place where memory, love, and attentiveness converged, and where future listeners could continue the quiet, patient dialogue he had cultivated. Each corner held whispers of lessons learned, each stone carried the imprint of care, and each flower reflected the enduring rhythm of life. As night fully embraced the garden, Rick lay on the soft grass beneath the oak, feeling the pulse of the planet beneath his hands, the gentle hum of roots, the lullaby of the river, and the faint twinkle of distant stars. The farewell garden, alive with history, memory, and tender attention, cradled him in its rhythms. Rick whispered softly, "Thank you for everything. Thank you for teaching me, for watching, for listening. I will carry this forward." And in the gentle exhale that followed, he drifted into calm, meditative sleep, embraced by the garden, the planet, and the quiet continuity of life. Rick had walked the farewell garden, tended its paths, planted memories, and shared his quiet attentiveness with a younger soul. Now, as night wrapped the world in soft darkness, he discovered a new rhythm, a gentle, unbroken dialogue that unfolded not in waking hours, but in the realm of dreams. Dreams, he realized, were another form of conversation, subtle, intimate, and limitless, where the pulse of the planet and the whispers of memory could meet him directly. That night, as he lay beneath the oak tree, the stars faintly twinkling above, Rick felt the first stirrings of the dream world brush against his awareness. The air grew thick with a soft, familiar energy, and the hum of roots beneath the earth seemed to rise, resonating in harmony with his heartbeat. He breathed slowly, deliberately, allowing himself to sink into the gentle rhythm of anticipation. This was not sleep as mere rest, it was sleep as dialogue, an opportunity to converse with the planet in ways words could never reach. In the dream, the world shimmered with subtle vibrancy. Clouds floated lazily, forming shapes that seemed deliberate, arches like bridges, ribbons like smiles, waves of light that pulsed gently toward him. The river glimmered with a voice all its own, singing a soft lullaby that Rick recognized as acknowledgement. Stones arranged themselves in quiet patterns, leaves shifted in response to invisible gestures, and the breeze carried the scent of earth, flowers, and distant rain. The dream itself seemed alive, aware, and intimate, a bridge between his inner self and the world he had spent a lifetime observing. Rick spoke, though his voice was barely audible, and yet he felt the resonance of the world responding. "I see you, I care. I am here." In return, the shimmer of water pulsed gently, clouds swirled to meet him, and a subtle warmth brushed his cheek. The dream did not demand understanding, explanation, or acknowledgement from anyone else. It existed purely as presence, attention, and quiet love. He felt the world listening, not as an object, but as a partner in a slow, deliberate exchange, each gesture tender and precise. Within the dream, Rick found himself revisiting memories, moments of childhood, the first whispers to the sky, flowers blooming along the riverbank, the laughter of a younger listener in the garden. Each memory was vivid yet softened, as though viewed through the gentle haze of twilight. And each carried its own subtle dialogue, a conversation with the planet and with time itself. The dream wove together past, present, and potential future into a seamless tapestry of presence, connection, and intimacy. Rick realized that dreams offered a unique freedom. Here he could perceive without limitation, notice without distraction, and respond without expectation. The planet's pulse, the whispers of roots, the shimmer of rivers, the twinkle of stars, all were magnified in clarity, speaking directly to the core of his being. The dream became both teacher and companion, a space in which the quiet rhythms of life could unfold in their purest form, and where Rick's attentiveness could deepen without interference. He began to explore this dialogue consciously, observing the way the river shimmered in response to subtle shifts of thought, the way clouds moved with his breath, the way roots and stones rearranged themselves as if acknowledging his presence. Each movement, subtle yet deliberate, felt like a conversation, a question, an acknowledgement, a shared understanding. Rick noticed that even in dreams, the pulse of the planet carried the same lessons he had learned in waking hours: patience, attentiveness, humility, and quiet love. Sometimes the dreams wove in the younger listener, the child who had begun to learn from him. In the dream, they laughed together beneath floating clouds, placed stones in the river, and whispered thanks to flowers and roots. Rick noticed the continuity of teaching even here, the seamless extension of presence and attentiveness across waking and sleeping hours. Dreams, he realized, allowed for a dialogue not constrained by time or space, where connection could stretch across generations and echo endlessly in subtle, tender gestures. Rick also felt the soft pulse of impermanence in the dreams. Flowers would bloom and wilt, clouds would dissolve, rivers would shimmer and fade, and stars would flicker with gentle rhythm. And yet the dialogue persisted, alive in the subtle acknowledgments, in the gestures of presence, in the soft hum of life itself. He understood that impermanence was not a limitation, but a feature of the conversation, a reminder that attention and care were precious precisely because they were fleeting, delicate and easily overlooked. As the night deepened, Rick began to notice the blending of past lessons, present attentiveness, and future potential. He walked alongside the river, tracing its curves, feeling its pulse beneath his fingers and listening to the hum of roots. Clouds shifted slowly above, arranging themselves in gentle arcs and soft folds. Stones lined themselves with care, leaves drifted deliberately across the ground, and the breeze carried scents and sounds he had learned to recognize over decades. All of it was part of a conversation, tender and alive, in which he both participated and witnessed. Rick whispered softly to the dream, to the planet, and to his own awareness. "I am here. I see, I care. I will continue to notice." And in response, the world shimmered, pulsed, and breathed alongside him. There was no urgency, no expectation of return, no need for clarity beyond presence itself. The dialogue existed purely as acknowledgement, intimacy, and slow, deliberate love. Rick felt a profound sense of completion and continuity, knowing that dreams could carry the same pulse as waking life, a testament to the enduring rhythm of attentiveness and care. By the time dawn approached, the dream began to dissolve, blending softly into the quiet light of morning. Rick awoke beneath the oak tree, hands resting on the earth, heart attuned to the pulse of the planet and mind wrapped in the calm resonance of night's conversations. He carried the memory of dialogue, of gentle responses, and of quiet intimacy into the waking hours, realizing that the rhythm of dreams and the rhythm of life were intertwined, each enhancing the other in subtle, enduring ways. And as Rick rose, stretching beneath the soft morning sky, he whispered once more, "I notice. I care. I love. I will continue to listen." The world responded quietly in ripples, hums, and gentle shifts, and somewhere in the soft folds of day and night, in waking and dreaming, Rick and the planet continued their slow, patient dialogue, a conversation without words, without urgency, full of quiet wonder and enduring love. Rick had spent a lifetime learning to listen, to roots, rivers, clouds, stars, and the quiet pulse of the planet. He had whispered to the world as a child, nurtured his bond through attentive love, shared his knowledge with another, and found a rhythm in dreams that echoed the pulse of reality itself. And now, as the years settled softly around him, he felt the gentle tug of farewell, a moment to honor the connection, offer gratitude, and let go without losing the intimacy that had defined his life. It began with a quiet morning. The light fell through the oak leaves, brushing the ground in warm golden patterns. The river shimmered faintly, its familiar lullaby blending with the hum of roots beneath Rick's hands. He inhaled the scent of earth, flowers, and dew, sensing the subtle pulse of life all around him. And then he whispered softly, "I am here. I have always been here, and now I offer my gratitude." The wind shifted, as if acknowledging the words, carrying a subtle warmth across his cheeks. Rick walked slowly through the garden, pausing at each familiar corner. The stones, leaves, and flowers seemed to respond to his presence, subtle yet deliberate. Each gesture, placing a small flower near the river, smoothing a path, aligning a stone, was an acknowledgement of time, memory, and care. He realized that saying farewell did not mean leaving entirely. It was an act of reverent acknowledgement, a conversation conducted with patience, love, and gentle acceptance. He remembered the years of attentive observation, the quiet lessons of Mr. Alder, and the delicate rhythm of presence that had shaped his life. Each act of noticing, each whisper to the sky, each shared sandwich with clouds, had been a gesture of love. And now the last whisper was another gesture, an offering not of departure but of continuity. It was a gift to the planet, a soft declaration that their dialogue had been treasured and would endure, even if expressed in memory rather than presence. Rick knelt beside the river and pressed his hands gently against the water's edge. He remembered the first time he had felt the river's pulse, the soft answer that had affirmed his connection to the planet. He had spent decades learning its rhythms, nurturing a dialogue of care and attentiveness. And now, he whispered, "Thank you for listening, for responding, for being present. I am grateful for every moment, every breath, every ripple and whisper." The river shimmered in subtle acknowledgement, as if understanding every nuance of his words. He paused to reflect on the younger listener, the child he had guided in learning to notice, to be present, and to care. The lessons, he realized, would continue. The dialogue would persist in new hands, new hearts, new eyes that would see and respond. Farewell was not loss, it was transformation. His presence might fade, but the rhythm of care, attentiveness, and quiet love would carry on, echoing in generations yet to come. Rick moved to the oak tree, placing a hand on its trunk and closing his eyes. The texture of the bark, the subtle sway of branches, the distant shimmer of stars above, all were reminders of connection, patience, and enduring intimacy. He whispered again, more softly this time, "I will carry you with me as you have carried me. Thank you for your patience, for your presence, for your quiet love." The breeze shifted, brushing the leaves gently against his cheeks, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond they had shared. He reflected on the passage of time, the impermanence of life, and the enduring nature of presence. Every flower, every stone, every ripple in the river had been part of a dialogue that transcended urgency or expectation. Farewell did not erase these connections. It honored them, It was an act of gratitude, a recognition of what had been shared, and a gentle release into the continuity of life. Rick understood that letting go did not diminish intimacy. It allowed it to exist freely, carried forward in memory, attentiveness, and love. Rick wandered slowly to the edge of the garden, noticing the subtle shifts in sunlight, the gentle sway of the grass, and the soft flicker of stars beginning to emerge. He paused, inhaling deeply, feeling the pulse of the planet beneath his hands and the quiet hum of life surrounding him. And then, with the gentlest of exhalations, he offered the final whisper of acknowledgement. "I love you. I notice you. I am grateful. Farewell until we meet again." The world responded with delicate ripples, shifts of light, and the soft murmur of wind through the trees. He lingered for a long while, letting the gentle acknowledgements of the planet wash over him. Farewell was not abrupt. It was a slow, deliberate exchange of gratitude and love, a continuation of the dialogue that had shaped his life. Rick realized that closure did not require leaving entirely. It required presence, attentiveness, and the careful offering of acknowledgement. His last whisper was both an ending and a bridge, carrying love forward into memory and the ongoing rhythms of life. As evening deepened, Rick lay on the soft grass beneath the oak tree, hands pressed gently against the earth, feeling the pulse of roots, the lullaby of the river, the sway of leaves, and the shimmer of stars above. The farewell garden, the planet, and the world itself cradled him in their rhythms. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Thank you for listening, for being present, for sharing this journey. I will carry you with me always." And in that gentle exhale, he drifted into a calm, meditative sleep, cradled by the enduring pulse of life and the soft intimacy of farewell. Rick understood, in that quiet moment, that the dialogue would never truly end. Dreams, memory, attention, and the younger listener's presence would all carry the rhythm forward. Farewell was not final. It was an acknowledgement of continuity, a soft passing of care and attentiveness, a gentle bow to the unbroken dialogue of existence. In letting go, he felt a profound peace, a sense that the world would continue to pulse with the love, attention, and presence he had devoted his life to cultivating. And somewhere in the soft folds of night, in the rhythm of river and roots, clouds and stars, Rick's last whisper continued to echo, a testament to quiet love, patient attention, and enduring presence. Rick had whispered his last words of gratitude to the planet, laid memories in the farewell garden, and shared his quiet attentiveness with another soul. And yet, even in farewell, he felt the pulse of life surrounding him, the subtle hum of existence carrying his presence forward. He realized with gentle wonder that endings were never truly endings. They were simply transitions, reflections, and soft continuations of a dialogue that had always been alive. Morning light spilled across the fields, golden and slow, brushing grass, leaves, and river ripples with warmth. Rick walked among them with the careful steps of someone who had learned patience, presence, and quiet love. He breathed deeply, inhaling the scent of soil, moss, and early flowers, feeling the pulse beneath his hands and the hum of life around him, and he smiled softly, knowing that though he might step away, his connection endured, carried in the rhythm of the world itself. He visited familiar spots, the river's edge, the soft grass beneath the oak, the cluster of stones aligned long ago. Each place held memory, intimacy, and gentle acknowledgement. Rick observed subtle signs of continuity, leaves swaying in patterns he recognized, water rippling with faint shimmering acknowledgement, the faint glow of early stars fading into daylight. These moments, small yet profound, reminded him that presence was never lost. It was carried forward in quiet resonance, in the ongoing pulse of life and love. Rick paused beneath the oak, hands pressed gently on the textured bark, remembering Mr. Alder's lessons. The mentor's guidance had taught him that listening mattered more than speaking, that presence mattered more than recognition, and that care mattered more than urgency. Now Rick offered these lessons silently to the world, and to the younger listener he had mentored. They were embedded in the earth, in stones, in flowers, in the subtle ripples of rivers and roots, a dialogue that would continue far beyond his own presence. He walked slowly through the farewell garden, touching each stone, brushing fingers across petals, tracing the curves of familiar paths. Each gesture was deliberate, an acknowledgement of past care and an offering to the future. Rick felt the pulse of continuity beneath his hands, the quiet love he had cultivated, the attentiveness he had nurtured, and the rhythm of presence that had shaped his life, all carried forward by the world itself. Time did not diminish it. It expanded it, creating ripples across memory, landscape, and heart. Rick reflected on the younger listener, who would continue to cultivate presence and care. The soft gift he had offered, a quiet attentiveness to life, a gentle engagement with the world, a patient love, would ripple outward. The dialogue, he realized, was unbroken. Even if he stepped away physically, his influence, his love, and his rhythm would persist. The younger soul would notice, attend, and participate, extending the cycle of quiet love, patience, and presence into new lives and future days. He found a small patch of sunlight on the soft grass and lay down, letting the warmth seep into him. The river hummed a gentle lullaby. The roots beneath his hands pulsed softly, and clouds drifted lazily across the sky. Rick closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the full embrace of continuity. He understood that legacy was not monumental or loud, but quiet, patient, intimate, and enduring. Every act of attention, every gesture of care, every whispered acknowledgement had been a building block in this ongoing dialogue. Rick felt a subtle, profound connection with the entire planet. The wind brushed his cheeks, leaves shifted gently toward him. The river rippled with light and distant clouds shimmered in soft arcs. These were acknowledgments of presence, whispers of continuity, and tender reminders that love, attention, and care never truly fade. Even in physical absence, the pulse persisted. The world carried memory, reflection, and intimacy forward, in ways both delicate and profound. He let himself drift into reflection, thinking of all the moments that had defined his journey. The first whispers to the sky, the gentle guidance of his mentor, the slow, star-slow dance of attention and love, the younger listener who now carried the rhythm forward, and the countless, subtle gifts of the planet that had marked his life with wonder. Each memory was both tender and luminous, forming a soft mosaic that held the essence of his existence. As twilight approached, Rick lay beneath the oak tree once more, feeling the pulse of roots, the lullaby of the river, and the shimmer of clouds above. He whispered softly, not as an ending but as a gentle acknowledgement. I notice. I care. I love. I am grateful. And you will continue. The world responded in delicate ripples, shifts of light, and a soft murmur of wind through the leaves, echoing the intimate dialogue that had defined his life. Rick's breath slowed. His body relaxed and his mind drifted into a serene, meditative awareness. He felt the unbroken connection with the planet, the younger listener, and the countless moments of quiet love he had nurtured. And in that stillness, he understood that presence, attentiveness, and care were eternal, not bound by time, by location, or by circumstance. They persisted in memory and action, in the subtle rhythms of the world itself, and so, as night fully embraced the landscape, Rick stretched gently, feeling the earth beneath him, the hum of life around him, and the pulse of the planet flowing through every root, stone, and ripple. He whispered once more, a soft signature to the world. And somewhere Rick is still out there, lying in the grass, whispering into the stars. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well. Everything's going to be okay, man.